Chapter 692. Wu Qi's mind was buzzing. Lu Bang was crying and begging King Yang Qiu to withdraw his troops? And in his own name? He couldn't bear to see the people being slaughtered and the people mourning, so he wanted King Yang Qiu to withdraw his troops in his own name? Since when did Lu Bang become a compassionate man like a guardian angel? His own father was threatened to be chopped up and made into meat soup, but he still wanted a share of the soup. How could he pity those innocent people who were affected by the war between De Yu and Myriad Immortal Alliance? Well, even if Lu Bang had become a real compassionate man after spending more than 2,000 years practicing meditation and worshipping Buddha, did he have to act so strongly? Rolling and howling on the ground, disregarding his dignity? Wasn't that a trick only a shrew in the countryside could do? This guy must be plotting something. Wu Qi fixed his eyes on Lu Bang's face, not daring to ignore any subtle changes in his expression. This guy must be plotting something, and it was aimed at King Yang Qiu. If this plot was really aimed at King Yang Qiu, then Wu Qi was likely to be affected. How could Wu Qi let Lu Bang's plan succeed? With his legs dangling behind him and his arms wrapped around King Yang Qiu's thigh, Lu Bang looked up at King Yang Qiu and said affectionately, "Your Highness, you killed that beauty just now. Although you only killed her, I seem to see countless people wailing and dying in the flames of war. Do you know how many innocent people have been killed in the war between De Yu and Myriad Immortal Alliance over the years?" King Yang Qiu narrowed his eyes and said nothing. How many people had been killed? Perhaps none of the officials in De Yu could answer this question. There was no household registration system in De Yu. Every 10 years, a local official would conduct a rough census of the local population. However, this census was only carried out in the towns and villages around the big cities. As for the villages in the wilderness or those built on newly developed lands, only God knew how many people lived in them. After fighting with the Union of 10,000 Immortals for several years, there must be a lot of De Yu people who were accidentally killed, but how many? King Yang Qiu shook his head. He could only vaguely remember that hundreds of large cities had been completely razed by the Alliance, and thousands of small and medium-sized cities had been breached by fiend immortals of the Alliance. All the people in these cities had their souls captured and made into fiend artifacts. As for how many of those small and medium towns were destroyed, he didn't care. He never cared about these small things. The number of De Yu's people was so many that it was hundreds of millions of times more than the number of stars in the sky. Who would care about a few casualties? Shaking his head, King Yang Qiu grabbed Lu Bang by the shoulder and threw him back to his seat, then gave a disgusted look at the tears, snot, and a large pool of saliva that Lu Bang had left on his robe. Annoyed, King Yang Qiu stamped his foot, and the large piece of robe turned into ashes that drifted away. Only then did he say in a flat voice, "Is King of Han here to talk nonsense with me?" Lu Bang sprung to his feet. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he snapped, "What nonsense are you talking about? This concerns the life and death of countless people." Wu Qi shook his head. Lu Bang was really good at this. He could talk and shout at the same time, and at the same time, he could still shed tears. It was hard to believe that he could control his body at the same time. With a smile, Wu Qi turned to look at Zhang Liang and the others. Zhang Liang and Xiao He were drinking with their heads down, all their attention on the cups, while Han Exen was squinting at King Yang Qiu's generals. To Wu Qi, Han Exen's eyes were like those of a perverted surgeon who was sizing up his dissected subjects. There was a calm madness in his eyes that made one feel uneasy, like a frozen flame. As for Fan Kuai, he seemed to be simply eating and drinking, his small eyes glancing at the bodies of the female cultivators who stood frozen in the hall from time to time. But occasionally, he would roll his eyes and send a few cold and fierce glances at the guards in the hall. Judging from the way his muscles were twitching, he seemed to be ready to burst into action and rush out of the hall at any time. Sure enough, none of them were easy to deal with. Wu Qi snorted coldly. In front of everyone, he pulled out a few pieces of black bone from the sleeve of his battle robe and scratched them with his sharp nails, turning them into 5 little men. He smiled and nodded to Han Exen, then placed the 5 little people on the table in a row. Carefully, he cut his finger and drew a strange rune on the little people's chests with his blood. The faces of Zhang Liang, Xiao He, Han Xin, and Fan Kuai flickered slightly, and Han Xin and Fan Kuai straightened their bodies at the same time. On the other hand, a few heavily armored captains sitting next to Wu Qi nodded approvingly at him, then straightened their backs and gripped the weapons placed next to them. Because of Wu Qi's seemingly inconspicuous action, the hall suddenly became filled with a murderous aura. King Yongqiu looked down at the crowd and saw what they were doing. He nodded with a smile, then turned to Liu Bang and said, "You are not that kind of man." With tears in his eyes, Liu Bang looked at King Yongqiu and said, "That's exactly what I am. I really can't bear to see this." King Yongqiu raised a finger and said with a cold grin, "Stop acting and tell me the truth. Why are you here?" With a cold smile on his face, King Yongqiu said in a deep voice, "If you don't tell me what you're here for, I don't mind killing all of you here." Hee, the reason why you, Liu Bang, were able to get away from the banquet at Hongmen was that Xiang Yu was too stupid. Liu Bang, do you really think I'm a headstrong fool like Xiang Yu? Wu Qi gently flicked the little man in front of him with his finger and said with a faint smile, "Your Excellency, you have a keen eye. I also think this man named Liu Bang is overacting." "Well, Your Excellency, why don't we just kill them, extract their souls, and interrogate them about their purpose of coming here? I can also try to see if the spells I've been studying recently are really useful." King Yongqiu gave Wu Qi an approving look. Just as he was about to speak, Yu Qingqing, who had come to the Great Hall angrily to pick a fight with Wu Qi but had not had a chance to show off, rose to his feet. With a hint of arrogance and disdain, Yu Qingqing glanced at Wu Qi, then clasped his hands behind his back and said with a graceful expression, "Your Excellency, King of Han is, after all, a special emissary of the Celestial Court. How can we kill him? No matter what King of Han's intention is, we can just ask him to explain it to us." Taking a deep breath, Yu Qingqing pointed at Wu Qi and said with a cold grin, "Tan Lang, as His Excellency's personal guard, who gave you the courage to openly threaten the Celestial Ambassador? What are you waiting for? Destroy those 5 puppets." Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and smiled, but he did not say a word. "Who gave him the courage to do that? Isn't it King Yongqiu?" When Liu Bang smeared his snot and tears on King Yongqiu just now, King Yongqiu wished he could kill Liu Bang with a punch. "Yu Qingqing, you are the master of Yu Academy and the first great editor of Great Yen. How can you not see this?" Lightly flicking the 5 little puppets with his fingers, Wu Qi gave Yu Qingqing a smile. Suddenly, a wisp of black smoke rushed out of his fingertip and disappeared into the body of one of the puppets. Zhang Liang gave a muffled snort as the black smoke on his face grew even stronger. In the blink of an eye, his face had turned pitch black, as if black blood was dripping out of his pores. With a furious roar, he hurriedly swallowed an immortal pill to protect his heart meridian, then flicked his wrist and shot a beam of starlight toward Wu Qi. One of the generals next to Wu Qi laughed wildly as he produced a large shield, 1 foot and 2 inches thick, and placed it in front of Wu Qi. The starlight hit the shield, but it only produced a plume of smoke and did not leave a mark on it. Only when the starlight returned did everyone see that it was a small flying dagger the size of a fingernail and shaped like a crescent moon. Xiao He, Han Xin and Fan Kuai leaped out at the same time, but King Yongqiu's subordinates, hundreds of military officers and oracles, as well as hundreds of long-bow men standing at the foot of the wall, had surrounded them. There was no time for them to attack. Numerous talismans lit up over the hall, and a terrible pressure fell from the sky, preventing Xiao He and the others from moving. Yu Qingqing's face flickered between pale and blue as he stared at Wu Qi and snapped in a low voice, How audacious of you! Do you want His Excellency to bear the name of disloyalty?" King Yongqiu did not answer. Staring coldly at Yu Qingqing, Wu Qi snapped, "What do you mean by disloyalty?" Tan Lang knew that only by killing their enemies could the wild beasts in the mountains survive and occupy the vaster hunting grounds. This Liu Bang is obviously a treacherous man. Disregarding his status, he cried out loud, and it is clear that he is plotting against His Excellency. As His Excellency's advisor, instead of thinking of a way to deal with him, old Mr. Yu is speaking up for an outsider. Hee, do you think you are very righteous? Liu Bang's tears magically disappeared. Looking curiously at Wu Qi, he nodded and said, "This fellow seems to know me very well. TSK, now that King Yangqiu has an unreasonable character like you working for him, he will be even more difficult to deal with in the future." Laughing strangely, Lu Bang turned to King Yangqiu, cupped his fist, and said, "I'm talking about a piece of top-secret information. I wonder what price King Yangqiu is willing to pay for it?" King Yangqiu's expression remained unchanged as he said in a deep voice, "Tell me first, and I'll see how much it's worth." With a wry smile, Lu Bang cursed in a low voice. "Initially, I wanted to pretend to be compassionate, saying that I want to end this war and put out the flames of war for the benefit of the common people. That's why I betrayed the sovereign's latest move and killed him. But Your Excellency didn't fall for it, so there's nothing I can do." Shaking his head and sighing for a while, Lu Bang said frankly, "I'll provide you with the sovereign's movements for the next month, and Your Excellency will send someone to kill him as soon as possible, so that the sovereign's position in the Celestial Court can be vacated, and I can place my own men in there. What do you think of this deal, Your Excellency?" Lu Bang stopped crying and acting. The rascality in his bones was too much for everyone to bear, and they could not help but shudder. As the celestial ambassador of the Celestial Court, the King of Han conferred by the Celestial Court, he had openly hired a murderer to kill someone. Lightly tapping the table with his finger, King Yangqiu said in a cold voice, "I want to know the specific position of the sovereign in the Celestial Court." The sovereign of the Myriad Immortal Alliance, Immortal Ding Jun, is in charge of 50% of the pill workshops in the Celestial Court, Lu Bang said neatly. His eldest disciple, Marshal Lu Peng, is in charge of one of the 8 armies of the Celestial River. His second disciple, Immortal Fire Virtue, is in charge of one of the 5 armies of the Great Fire Division in the Celestial Court, and his third disciple, Immortal Enlightenment, is the former general of the Great Celestial Emperor, and has a personal army of 120,000 soldiers under his command. Exclamations rang out in the Great Hall. King Yangqiu's eyes flickered as he gritted his teeth and said, "No wonder the Myriad Immortal Alliance has grown so fast, and no wonder the attitude of the Celestial Court toward it is ambiguous." Wu Qi frowned. Was Lu Bang's intention really that simple? Chapter 693. Myriad Immortal Alliance was plunged into chaos because of King Yangqiu's father, King Yangshan. King Yangshan served as a military counselor in Diyu's imperial court, roughly equivalent to the Minister of Defense or the Grand Council. He was a staunch anti-immortal, and he devoted all his energy and pursuits to the great cause of conquering the immortals on Pangu continent. Annihilating the immortals, conquering the outer heavenly realms, capturing the Celestial Court, knocking all the emperors of the Celestial Court off their thrones, and stepping on 10,000 feet so that these lofty immortals would never rise again. This was what King Yangshan had taught his children since they were young. Therefore, a few years ago, King Yangshan had set up an ambush with his fierce generals and several supreme oracles, severely wounding the sovereign of Myriad Immortal Alliance, and injuring his immortal soul, putting him at risk of death. The elders of Myriad Immortal Alliance's Divine Hall were also seriously injured. More than 60% of the elders were seriously injured, and several of them were on the verge of death. Myriad Immortal Alliance had suffered such a heavy blow, so it was only natural for them to retaliate. Just like King Yangshan's extreme hatred for immortals, there were extremists among the immortals as well, especially the Myriad Immortal Alliance, whose purpose was to conquer Pangu continent and turn the fertile land into a paradise for immortals. Everything on Pangu continent should be controlled by immortals. Every flower, every grass, every insect, every fish, even every immortal stone, energy stone, or even the most inconspicuous metal or should be used by immortals to improve their cultivation base and the Tao. In the eyes of those immortals, the mortals who now had the right to rule Pangu continent should become their slaves and be driven by them forever. Therefore, taking advantage of the fact that Immortal Ding Jun was severely wounded, the radical immortals of Myriad Immortal Alliance retaliated on a large scale. They destroyed hundreds of poorly defended cities in Diyu with the Art of Stars, and then triggered a series of wars. The flames of war broke out everywhere on Pangu continent, and the common people were caught in the fierce battles. Countless people were killed or wounded by accident. This was the cause and effect of the war between De Yu and the union of 10,000 immortals described by Lu Bang. According to Lu Bang's analysis, Immortal Ding Jun was the spiritual leader of the union of 10,000 immortals, and also the source of the rapid development of the union of 10,000 immortals. Without Immortal Ding Jun, the union of 10,000 immortals would be like a group of dragons without a leader, and their combat effectiveness would suddenly drop several times. At the same time, without Immortal Ding Jun, the immortals of the union of 10,000 immortals would not be able to provide him with the astronomical number of immortal pills made by the Celestial Court, and the ability of the union of 10,000 immortals to sustain the war would also plummet. More importantly, without Immortal Ding Jun's control, his 3 disciples, who held great power in the Celestial Court, would no longer be able to provide any protection to the union of 10,000 immortals, and the Celestial Court's attitude toward the union of 10,000 immortals would also undergo a subtle change. Of course, the most important factor was Lu Bang. As long as King Yangqiu could gather people to assassinate Immortal Ding Jun, Lu Bang would be able to let his trusted subordinates take over Immortal Ding Jun's power. At that time, Lu Bang would be able to use the resources and power in his hands to influence the decisions of the Celestial Court. When the union of 10,000 immortals lost the faint support of the Celestial Court, wouldn't it be a piece of cake for you to wipe out the union of 10,000 immortals? In fact, if it were not for Immortal Ding Jun's help behind the scenes, wouldn't it be a piece of cake for your highness to crack the formation in front of you? After rambling on and on, Lu Bang finally pointed out the biggest problem that King Yangqiu was facing. King Yangqiu gave Wu Qi a quick glance, and Wu Qi nodded slightly. Even an idiot could figure out that without the help of someone from the Celestial Court, how could the formation constructed by Lord Wandering Immortal condense the true form of a Celestial Lord? How could it possess the divine power of a Celestial Lord? It was clear that someone from the Celestial Court had deliberately taken care of Lord Wandering Immortal, and that was why they had constructed such a formation that even Wu Qi found tricky. If, as Lu Bang had said, he could replace Immortal Ding Jun in the Celestial Court and eliminate the intentional or unintentional support of the Celestial Court for the union of 10,000 immortals, the union of 10,000 immortals would be a piece of cake. King Yangqiu pondered for a moment, then suddenly clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Good, good, good. King of Han, Lu Bang, you really have a sharp tongue. Someone, send these girls to King of Han's chariot." Staring fixedly at Lu Bang, King Yangqiu cried out in a deep voice, "King of Han, you'd better remember your promise." With a smile on his face, Lu Bang cupped his fist at King Yangqiu, then handed him a pale purple jade pendant. King Yangqiu grabbed the jade pendant and probed it with his divine sense, then crushed it to pieces. Waving his hand, he cried out, "Open the front door and send our guests off." The tense atmosphere in the great hall eased abruptly. King Yangqiu's subordinates slowly retreated, and the siege that had been suppressing Han Xian and the others was instantly disintegrated. Smiling, Wu Qi crushed the 5 puppets on the table with a flick of his finger, then rose to his feet and followed King Yangqiu to send Lu Bang and the others off. The banquet ended hastily, but King Yangqiu was clearly in high spirits, and Lu Bang was also overjoyed. There was no sign of dissatisfaction on his face. Hundreds of beautiful female cultivators and immortals, whose clothes were barely covering their bodies, were escorted into Lu Bang's chariot by a large group of soldiers. While chatting perfunctorily with King Yangqiu, Lu Bang kept peeping at their swaying buttocks and swaying thighs. These beautiful female cultivators and immortals made Lu Bang overjoyed, and his mind was no longer on King Yangqiu. Drums and trumpets filled the air, and flags fluttered in the wind as a group of people escorted Lu Bang and the others into the chariot. Almost at the same time, Lu Bang and the others turned to look at Wu Qi. Especially Zhang Liang, who had been struck by Wu Qi with a curse technique. With a cold face, he nodded at Wu Qi and said, "If there's a chance, I hope General can teach me a thing or two." With a faint smile on his face, Wu Qi cupped his fist at Zhang Liang and said nothing. Squinting at Zhang Liang, he suddenly remembered Zhang Liang's background. Was his master called Old Man Huangshi? His master came from the Immortal League, so it was no wonder they were now subordinates of the Celestial Court. Wu Qi had vaguely figured out the ins and outs of what had happened in those years, and he just hoped to get the evidence from King Yangqiu. Perhaps, by following King Yangqiu's lead, Wu Qi could go back to Earth. Even though his foundation was now on Pangu continent, and his lovers and friends were all there, he still had to go back to Earth. How could he face his master and brothers, who had died tragically, if he did not raze Green City to the ground? The female cultivators and immortals entered the chariot one after another. Those who could cultivate and become immortals were not fools. Since Liu Bang was conferred the title of King of Han by the Celestial Court, it was better to go with him than to be King Yangqiu's captive. King Yangqiu treated them like playthings, and many of the captured cultivators and immortals were either raped to death or sold to other powerful nobles in Great Yu. None of them had a good end. Staying with Liu Bang, even as his concubines, was better than being tortured to death in King Yangqiu's hands. Looking at the girls entering the chariot, Liu Bang could not help but burst out laughing. Complacently, he said a few more meaningless words to King Yangqiu, then waved his hand and said, "Let's go, Liang. Well, it's a long way back to Liangzhu, so you'd better keep your spirits up." Sitting in Liu Bang's chariot was none other than Reverend Li Yang of Green City. Upon hearing Liu Bang's order, Reverend Li Yang bowed respectfully, looking even more submissive than a servant. Wu Qi gave him an indifferent glance. He did not understand what was wrong with Reverend Li Yang. What was the benefit of being Liu Bang's chariot's driver? Liu Bang's chariot slowly flew up amidst the faint clouds and mist. With his hands clasped behind his back, King Yangqiu wished him a pleasant journey in a loud voice. The generals and oracles around King Yangqiu smiled with relief. With Liu Bang and his unwelcome guests gone, everyone felt relieved. Suddenly, Wu Qi's heart began to race violently. His skin tensed up, and his face turned deathly pale in an instant. Almost subconsciously, Wu Qi took a step to the side. Amidst the clouds in the far distance, a golden gleam flickered, as an arrow, 6 feet long and as thick as a thumb, forged from a golden alloy, shot through the air soundlessly, leaving a trail of golden light that stretched 1,000 feet long. It brushed past Wu Qi's shoulder. The shaft of the strange-shaped arrow was shaped like a wave of water, and its surface was engraved with countless tiny water patterns. Complicated runes were drawn on the shaft using thin threads made of unknown pale red crystals. As the arrow flew past Wu Qi, he smelled a warm, sweet aroma. The arrow was poisonous, and it was an extremely insidious, slow-acting poison. A miserable howl rang out as the arrow brushed past Wu Qi's body and hit a disciple of Yu Academy standing behind him. Blood spattered as the arrow pierced through the tall, handsome young man's chest. His body swayed a little, and then he fell to the ground like a man made of sand, turning into a pool of blood and minced meat. The arrow's momentum did not dissipate. After piercing through the man's body, it continued to fly backward. Another disciple of Yu Academy and 2 oracles under King Yangqiu's command were pierced by the arrow, and like the first man, they all fell to the ground in pieces. In the end, the arrow flew in front of a heavily armored general. The general cried out in surprise and firmly caught the arrow with both hands. A shrill screech rang out as the general lost his balance and was pushed back by the tremendous force carried by the arrow. At last, he bumped into a longbow man, who reached out and pressed his hands on the general's shoulders. A muffled thud rang out, and the longbow man was also pushed back 3 steps by the tremendous force. Only then did the 2 men join forces and completely neutralize the force of the arrow. Amidst a cracking sound, the general separated his hands, and the arrow fell onto the cloud platform. Raising his stiff palms, the general said in a deep voice to King Yangqiu, whose face was unsightly, "Your Excellency, all the bones in my palms are shattered. This is the bear-slaughtering arrow, a secret weapon of the Celestial Court." The bear-slaughtering arrow was a weapon specially crafted by the expert craftsmen of the Celestial Court, specifically made to counter the body-tempering technique used by high-level generals of Diyu, such as the true body of heaven and earth. The Yellow Emperor Xianyuan, one of the ancestors of the human race, was born in the Yuxiong Plain, where the capital city of Diyu, Liangzhu, was located. There were bears, there were bears. Therefore, the secret weapon of the celestial court was called the bear-slaughtering arrow, and the meaning behind it was obvious. With a livid face, King Yangqiu turned to look in the direction where the arrow came from, where Wu Qi had been peeping at the formation just now. Gnashing his teeth, he growled in a low voice, "Lord Wandering Immortal, I can't believe they have bear-slaughtering arrows. It seems that Lu Bang is telling the truth." Wu Qi frowned and said nothing. King Yangqiu had put the blame on Lord Wandering Immortal, and Wu Qi felt that it should be done by the people of Myriad Immortal Alliance. But their target was not King Yangqiu, but Wu Qi himself. It was an assassination aimed at Wu Qi himself. Chapter 694. But the Gourd Immortal Market was a special case. It had been in operation for hundreds of years, and the officials of Diyu had never discovered its existence. This proved that the person behind it had a very strong background and ability to ensure its safety. So, why was there no cave abode with immortal veins that was also absolutely safe? Wu Qi bowed and replied, "I'll do my best." Yu Qingqing's face twitched slightly. He gave Wu Qi a sarcastic glance but did not say anything. Yu Qingqing's eyes wandered, and no one knew what he was thinking. Nodding with satisfaction, King Yangqiu turned to Wu Qi and cried out, "Tan Lang, what is the strongest formation you can lay out in that catalog of formations? If I ask you to lay out a formation to deceive people, and then lay out another formation to trap and kill people, how many gold immortals can you deal with?" The head of Ming Li, which Wu Qi had given to Bo Yunting, had been sent to Liangzhu by King Yangqiu through the most urgent channel. Unfortunately, spirit herbs were hard to come by, and Pangu continent was Diyu's territory. So, after years of effort, there were still dozens of spirit herbs that had not been collected. But those spirit herbs were not important. As long as the spirit liquid made from the internal organs of dragon pythons of fire and ice was used as medicine, the sovereign could still be cured. It was for his father that Li Qinghua, the sovereign of Myriad Immortal Alliance, tried to capture Goldhorn and Silverhorn alive. As a result, he ended up in a sorry state. But this time, the Alliance had found a pair of dragon pythons of fire and ice somewhere on Pangu continent. They were the sovereign's last hope to save his life. The dozen or so generals and oracles in the Great Hall laughed in a deep voice at the same time. Myriad Immortal Alliance had defeated Diyu? How was that even possible? Only those who were in the core of Diyu knew how terrible the latent power of Diyu was. Now, in order to deal with the union of 10,000 immortals, the power that was exposed was not even a drop in the bucket. If it weren't for the fact that Diyu had been peaceful for a long time, more than 30 generations of human emperors had not experienced any major upheavals and changes before the current one, the entire Diyu was like a pool of stagnant water. All aspects of its functions were a bit old and solidified, so it couldn't summon too strong a force to launch an attack on the union of 10,000 immortals. At the same time, it was also because the real top existences like Diyu either retired or wandered around the world. The existing supreme priests were also unwilling to make a move against the younger generation of the union of 10,000 immortals because of their identity. Otherwise, the union of 10,000 immortals would have been crushed to pieces. How many golden immortals did he have to deal with? Wu Qi pondered for a moment, then cupped his fist and said, "If your excellency can provide us with enough materials for the formation, weapons of slaughter, and all kinds of vicious and poisonous things, I dare not say much, but if less than 100 gold immortals dare to enter the formation, as long as your excellency sends a troop of soldiers to ambush them, they will all be killed." At the thought of the significance of this cave abode, Chief Wandering Immortal could not help but feel his blood rushing to the top of his head, making him feel hot all over, as if he could fly away with the wind at any time. Even if I don't care about it for myself, I should do it for my descendants, right? He had to get this cave abode, and he had to kill this lucky guard who served King Yangqiu at all costs. Standing on the top of a mountain, Chief Wandering Immortal stared blankly at Wu Qi as he said in a deep voice, "This guy is not easy to deal with. I've got to think of another way to kill him." He did not care about the energy stones and immortal stones offered by Immortal Gourd, for he did not care about such a small profit. But the person who offered the reward had sworn to a safe and secret immortal cave abode was a resource that Chief Wandering Immortal desperately desired. The high-spirited King Yang Qiu told Wu Qi and others the top-secret information that Liu Bang had sent him. He had given orders to everyone, and the most important person in the plan to kill the sovereign was, of course, Wu Qi. Clenching his fists confidently, King Yang Qiu said with a cold grin, "Now that my army is strong, the rebels of Myriad Immortal Alliance have no choice but to collude with itinerant cultivators and itinerant immortals, taking advantage of the terrain to lay out all kinds of formations and put up a desperate resistance. Clearly, the downfall of the alliance is imminent. The reason why they are still so determined to fight against you is that they still have the hope that the sovereign can lead them to defeat me, do you? That assassin just now must be the provocation of Chief Wandering Immortal. Just ignore him." Frowning, King Yang Qiu said coolly, "After we kill the sovereign of Myriad Immortal Alliance, the Wandering Immortal Hall, the Ascending Immortal Hall, the Hermit Immortal Hall, and the Divine Immortal Hall will be wiped out one by one. The divine sense of an immortal could lock onto an enemy from hundreds of millions of miles away. The bear slaughtering arrow was a fierce weapon secretly crafted by the master craftsmen of the Celestial Court. It was said that any target locked onto by the divine sense could be killed in a flash. In other words, a bear slaughtering arrow could hit its target from a distance of 10 miles or even 100 miles. If the target was tens of thousands of miles away, or even billions of miles away, the divine sense could lock onto the target, and the arrow would definitely hit its target. The current to you was like a bottomless pool. It looked lifeless like a pool of stagnant water, but once it was disturbed, the waves it set off were strong enough to engulf everything. Therefore, Yu Qingsheng and the others did not take King Yang Qiu's teasing words seriously. King Yang Qiu nodded slowly when he heard Wu Qi say that they had not found any trace of the assassin. Those who could use the bear slaughtering arrow on Pangu continent were not ordinary immortals, and there must be the power of the Celestial Court behind them. King Yang Qiu did not expect to catch the assassin. He was just trying to show his attitude. Yu Qingsheng smiled faintly, shook his head contemptuously, and gave Wu Qi a sideways glance. King Yang Qiu was very satisfied with Wu Qi's answer. He clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Excellent. That's it. Oh, whatever you want, just take it from the armory. However, this king wants you to wholeheartedly set up the strongest killing array. Can you do that?" Back in the Great Hall, Wu Qi told King Yang Qiu about the result of the search he had just led. Does a mere immortal Ding Jun, the sovereign of Myriad Immortal Alliance, really think he can turn the world upside down? King Yang Qiu's mind was now fully focused on the top-secret information provided by Liu Bang just now. He dismissed more than 90% of the people in the Great Hall, leaving only Yu Qingqing, Wu Qi, and a dozen generals and oracles in the hall. The heavy stone door slowly closed, and countless huge runes flowed down from the ceiling, turning the whole Great Hall into an isolated space. The people of Myriad Immortal Alliance and even other ordinary itinerant cultivators knew that the government of Diyu had a copy of the Pangu's map, which could monitor any energy veins on Pangu continent. Therefore, anyone who dared to open up a cultivation base in an immortal vein or cave abode would be forcefully suppressed and wiped out by the government of Diyu. Liang Zhu had already made arrangements to deal with what the Buddhist League cultivators had done on Pangu continent. Now, Wu Qi did not need to worry about the Buddhist League's revenge on his territory. 3 months later, the sovereign would bring a group of elders from Divine Hall and Gold Immortals from Hidden Immortal Hall to a perilous place on Pangu continent to hunt down a pair of dragon pythons of fire and ice, then extract their internal organs and concoct them into spirit liquid to be used in medicine. The sovereign was ambushed and seriously wounded by King Yang Qiu's father. If he could not be treated with spirit herbs, his immortal soul would dissipate, his immortal body would disintegrate, and eventually his soul would vanish. King Yang Qiu cleared his throat. Tapping the armrest of his throne, he said coolly, "But he is, after all, the sovereign of Myriad Immortal Alliance. If we can kill him and completely wipe out the union of 10,000 immortals, this would be a great credit. His Majesty is furious because of what happened to Left Minister Go Qinguang, and it has been recorded in Myriad Immortal Alliance. If I wipe out Myriad Immortal Alliance. For so many years, no one had ever heard of anyone who could escape from the target of a bear-slaying arrow. Therefore, when the arrow killed the 2 generals and 2 oracles behind Wu Qi, everyone thought that the target was one of them, and no one suspected that it was actually Wu Qi. After searching for a while in the cloud, they could not find any clues. Left with no choice, they glared down at the valley not far away, cursed and growled for a while, then returned to the Great Hall to report the situation to King Yangqiu. Slapping the armrest with both hands, King Yangqiu gritted his teeth and said, "My title of nobility will be promoted to a higher rank, and all of you will be conferred the title of Marquis." While Wu Qi was furious about who was trying to assassinate him with such a vicious weapon, all the immortals in the valley, including the Lord of Wandering Immortal Hall, were struck dumb. When Wu Qi and hundreds of soldiers were searching through the clouds, they all saw Wu Qi's face clearly. Tan Lang, the general whom King Yangqiu had just recruited, was not killed by the bear-slaying arrow. All the generals and oracles in the Great Hall cupped their fists and bowed to King Yangqiu at the same time as they cried out, "We're willing to die for your highness." King Yangqiu slapped the armrest of his throne and cried out in a deep voice, "That's great. Let's lay in ambush and kill Immortal Ding Jun with all our might." With hundreds of heavily armored soldiers, Wu Qi searched the airspace where the bear-slaying arrow had been shot for a long time, but apart from a faint fluctuation of immortal energy, he did not see even a shadow. The airspace was at the edge of the formation laid out by Myriad Immortal Alliance. Presumably, someone from the Alliance had sneaked out of the formation and shot the arrow at Wu Qi while hiding in the clouds. In any case, the plan says that all these people have to go to the 8 Treasures Lotus Throne. Anyway, let them all die. Glancing at the many allies standing around him, the Lord of Wandering Immortal Hall laughed grimly, then waved his hand and transformed into a gust of wind, flying back to the pool in the middle of the valley. A sheet of rainbow light soared into the sky, and 2 streams of clear air shaped like Ganoderma Rui flew whistling into the sky, but were quickly suppressed by the light and pushed back into the pool. Even with Lord Wandering Immortal's status in Myriad Immortal Alliance, he only had 3 bear-slaying arrows with him. Over the years, he had used them to kill 2 of Dayu's generals. Every time, it was a one-hit kill. Furthermore, the arrows didn't just kill the enemies they were dealing with. Even the people around the 2 generals were killed. But today, the last bear-slaying arrow did not hurt Wu Qi at all. Wu Qi bowed and thanked King Yangqiu, then walked out of the Great Hall to prepare for the deadly formation. On Pangu continent, there was a cave abode with an immortal vein that was not known by the officials of Dayu. Myriad Immortal Alliance had once offered an astronomical reward for all kinds of spirit herbs in order to concoct them to cure the sovereign. In order to appease Wu Qi, while everyone was busy working, King Yangqiu gave Wu Qi a message. Set up the formation and kill the sovereign in the place where the dragon pythons of fire and ice live. After doing some calculations on his fingers, Wu Qi added, "But it will take at least a month or 2 to set up such a ferocious formation. And I will need your highness to send a large number of people to help me. Otherwise, how could I possibly set up such a formation without a few years?" Chapter 695. Pangu continent was constantly absorbing the chaotic energy from outer heavenly realms, and it was constantly expanding and expanding at a rapid pace. It was said that when the great Saint Pangu split his body to form Pangu continent, it would expand by 1 centimeter in a day and a night. But, after countless eons, as the surface area of Pangu continent grew larger and larger, the chaotic energy it absorbed in a day and a night had allowed it to expand by 1,000,000 miles. If Pangu continent was a disk, then its radius would increase by 1,000,000 miles in a day and a night. It was an extremely frightening concept. Every day, the land area of Pangu continent would increase by the same amount as the land of dozens of provinces. Therefore, although Dayu was the lord of Pangu continent, Dayu did not occupy the whole continent. The human emperor had decreed that all the people of Dayu had the natural duty to work hard to reproduce. To put it bluntly, The human emperor encouraged the people of Diyu to work hard to have babies, and the more, the better. The direct descendants of Diyu's aristocratic clans each had at least 30 to 50 wives and concubines, and at most, 3 to 500, or even more than 1,000 or 2,000 wives and concubines. Relying on their strong bodies, they sowed seeds every night, so the great clans of Diyu had a large number of members. Every 18 years, Diyu would form a group of descendants of the great clans and spread out in all directions with soldiers and people to build new provinces, counties, cities, and so on. Even so, Diyu's efforts could not keep up with the speed of growth of Pangu continent. The edge of Pangu continent was often uninhabited for tens of billions of miles, with only newly grown hills and mountains, and only the various flowers and trees with tenacious vitality that had covered them in a short time, as well as the various natural treasures that were produced directly from the chaos. Wu Qi and his company were now near such a mountain that had just been born 3 years ago. The mountain was very far away from Mingu province, where King Yang Qiu's army was stationed. Even if Wu Qi were to fly with all his might and run at full speed with the Quafu chasing the sun step, it would take him at least 1,000 years to reach the edge of Pangu continent. Fortunately, King Yang Qiu was accompanied by Yugu, a supreme oracle. With the help of the Supreme Tower's ability to shatter the void, it only took them 3 days to get here. Looking into the distance, one could see the pitch-black sky and the twinkling stars in the distance. One could also see the thick, grayish-white, turbid spiritual qi in the sky. The murky energy was the legendary chaotic energy, which Pangu continent extracted directly from the surrounding sky and turned into its own mountains and rivers. Occasionally, the essence of chaotic energy would condense and transform into all kinds of spirit herbs that immortal cultivators dreamed of. Because it had only been formed for about 3 years, the weather within a radius of 10 billion kilometers around the mountain was extremely unstable. The seasons of spring, summer, autumn, and winter were not clearly distinguished here. At one moment, there would be thunderstorms, and in the next moment, heavy snow would fall. But, less than a quarter of an hour after the snow began to fall, hill-sized hailstones poured down from the sky accompanied by terrible rumbles. When he arrived here in Yugu's Supreme Tower, Wu Qi was hit by a terrible hail. Even though Wu Qi had seen a lot of things, and had seen countless frightening natural perilous situations up in the 9th heaven, he was still struck dumb and speechless by the sight of this huge hailstorm. Even the smallest hailstone had a diameter of around 1,000 feet. Although it was called hailstone, it was actually a highly condensed afterworld water element energy. Every hailstone was like a shooting star, falling from the sky with a long halo. Once it landed on the ground, it would immediately explode into huge mushroom clouds. It looked like millions of nuclear warheads had exploded on the ground at the same time, and the dreadful power caused the ground within a radius of 10 billion miles to shake violently. But it was just a tremble. The rocks and soil of Pangu continent were extremely strong, especially this fresh land that had just been born from the chaos. It was so hard that even ordinary gold immortals could not shake it. Although the hailstones were very powerful, not even a stone fell from the mountains. Instead, when the hailstones exploded, they turned into a great amount of sticky, cold liquid that flowed in all directions, gushing down from the mountains and turning into countless waterfalls that rushed down to the ground like flying dragons. Each drop of the liquid weighed tens of thousands of kilograms, and when such a waterfall poured down from the peaks of the mountains, its power and force made even the few generals who had stepped into the realm of Second Pangu Heaven beside Wu Qi speechless, and they could not help but take a few steps back into the Supreme Tower. No wonder the human emperor has issued a ban. Unless the new land has been stabilized for more than 10,000 years, no one under the realm of Second Pangu Heaven of Diyu is allowed to approach it. One of the generals shook his head and exclaimed, "Without our overall strength, ordinary people will die if they are sucked into this waterfall." Wu Qi could not help but keep nodding his head. This damn place was indeed extremely frightening. But it was also a supreme treasure trove. Rare acquired water element essence was rolling all over the ground. If he could form all kinds of Yin thunders and divine thunders of water element here, he would not have to worry about the lack of materials. Suddenly, Wu Qi's eyes lit up. On the top of the mountain, a spirit herb with 7 leaves and 21 greenish-blue fruits hanging on its single stem was bursting with a strong light. The spirit herb was like a black hole, sucking up all the liquid formed by the hailstones near the mountain. The blue color of the 21 fruits became stronger. After that, the spirit herb flickered, and before Wu Qi could reach out his hand to pluck the fruits, it had disappeared into the mountain, disappearing without a trace. Hiding in Wu Qi's ear, Ao Buzan sighed faintly and said, "What a treasure! It's a pity that I didn't get it." The supreme dark water essence fruit, also known as the water dragon fruit, is an innate spirit item. If an ordinary flood dragon eats it, he will immediately transform into a white dragon of water element and master the innate divine ability to control water. To dragons and flood dragons, this is a supreme treasure. Wu Qi's eyes brightened. He let out a great shout and spun his body like a spinning top, bringing up a strong stream of purple smoke as he darted out from the entrance of the supreme tower like a shooting star, throwing a heavy punch on the mountain. He was going to shatter the mountain and get that supreme dark water essence fruit. Crack! Wu Qi's fist smashed on the mountain, sending out large amounts of sparks. The mountain didn't change at all, but Wu Qi's wrist bone was broken into 2. Fortunately, the true body of heaven and earth scripture had a very strong self-healing ability. Wu Qi gasped, and his wrist bone quickly returned to normal. Damn it, what a hard rock. Wu Qi stared at the mountain in shock. How could this mountain be so hard? The few generals who had come with Wu Qi were delighted to see this. Imitating Wu Qi, they leaped into the air and smashed the mountain with their fists. Miserable howls rang out incessantly. Although Wu Qi's wrist bone was broken, the group of generals, who had exerted all their strength and whose cultivation bases were above the 7 stars realm of the second Panga heaven, who were strong enough to fight against 4th and 5th tier gold immortals, were all shattered from their fingers to their shoulder blades. The mountain, which had just formed from the chaos, was almost as strong as an innate spirit treasure. If it were a primordial immortal, he might be able to deal with it, but as for a gold immortal, it was better not to provoke him. Wu Qi looked at the generals, a little dumbfounded. The group of generals, who were all muscles and whose brains were almost replaced by muscles, were also looking at each other and laughing awkwardly. If word got out that they had injured themselves before even seeing the enemy, King Yangqiu would definitely skin them alive. A light cough rang out as Yu Gu, clad in a long black robe and looking like a ghost, slowly walked out of the Supreme Tower. Yu Gu snorted coldly when he saw Wu Qi and the others giggling foolishly. What a bunch of kids you are. These are mountain bones that have just been formed from chaotic energy, innate mountain bones that have not been contaminated by acquired energy and acquired energy. Even a primordial immortal would have to spend a lot of effort to break them, and you kids. Shaking his head, Yu Gu sighed and said, "I've seen fools, but I've never seen anyone as stupid as you." After scolding Wu Qi and the others, Yu Gu pointed at Wu Qi and shouted, "Tan Lang, what formation are you going to construct? Do it now. My strength is not in formations, so I can't help you study the formation diagrams. But if you need my help, I'll help you." Wu Qi cupped his fist and bowed to Yu Gu, then said respectfully, "Of course I'll need your help, Master Yu. Please show me your divine abilities when the time comes." King Yangqiu wanted to kill the sovereign, and at the same time, he wanted to take the credit for himself, so he did not want to leak the information. Therefore, if he wanted to ambush and kill the sovereign, he could only rely on his own army. The best way to ambush a powerful enemy was to construct a formation and kill the enemy. But, except for Yu Qingqing and his disciples, no one around King Yangqiu knew anything about formations. Since King Yangqiu did not want to use Yu Qingqing, he had to leave the task to Wu Qi. As for Yu Gu, the Supreme Oracle, although he possessed a mighty cultivation base, what he studied in the Directorate of Celestials was all kinds of evil poisons and sinister curses. He had devoted all his energy to these 2 fields of study, and he knew nothing about the Tao of formations. Therefore, Wu Qi could not count on him for this. Wu Qi studied the terrain around the mountain, then looked into the distance for a while, and finally decided on a good place to construct the formation. It was a valley about 1,000 miles long and less than a mile wide, looking like a narrow slit from the sky. It went nearly 100 miles deep into the ground and was densely filled with a sticky, heavy, black poisonous gas, the spirit-seizing black evil energy. This acquired murderous aura was extremely heavy, and if an immortal cultivator accidentally touched it, his Tao foundation would disintegrate and his immortal soul would vanish. Good place, it's indeed a good place. Wu Qi gave the valley a look, pointed his finger at it, and said with a smile, "Now, we just need to deploy a small maze formation and a small killing formation in the valley. It will be best if they are simple formations that can be easily identified by others. They are the most suitable ones." After that, Wu Qi pointed to a stretch of rugged hills near the valley and said, "The terrain here is complicated, and there are many holes and passages in the hills. It's the best place to construct our real formation. The enemy is very powerful, so we don't have to resort to any honorable means. Let's just use the myriad poisons formation. Although it's a little sinister, it's a good formation that can kill people." With a smile on his face, Wu Qi bowed to Yugu and said, "Old man you can use all your poisonous items now." Yugu grinned and gave Wu Qi an appreciative pat on the shoulder. "This kid is not bad, he knows how to construct a poison formation." Yugu shook his head proudly. To construct a poison formation as a supreme oracle, the countless vicious and evil poisons I can't be left out. This is tantamount to giving more than half of the credit to Yugu. This kid is very good. Yugu also felt that King Yang Qiu had found a capable talent this time. Following the arrangement, the crowd began to move quickly. Chapter 696. After giving Yugu the formation diagram of the myriad poisons formation and a few other spare formations, and asking him to take the 3,000 soldiers who had come with him to lay out the foundations of the various formations, Wu Qi led 4 generals whose cultivation bases had reached the 9 stars realm of the second Panga heaven toward a mountain range in the distance. These 4 generals were King Yang Qiu's trusted confidants, and they had been his servants for generations. They were all cousins, and they had grown up with King Yang Qiu since childhood. They ate, drank, and drank together, and their relationship with King Yang Qiu was no different from that of real brothers. According to the unspoken rules of the imperial clan of Diyu, after King Yang Qiu was conferred the title of king, these 4 generals also took his title as their surnames. They were Yang Qiu Fenghua, Yang Qiu Yushi, Yang Qiu Leilong, and Yang Qiu Dianjiao. Fenghua, Yushi, Leilong, and Dianjiao were all gods, and they took the title of king as their surnames. In Diyu, as long as they announced their names, outsiders would immediately know their identities and their positions at King Yang Qiu's side. Unlike King Yang Qiu's cold and solemn character, these 4 brothers were like active volcanoes, and they would jump up and kill people at the slightest provocation. They were 4 real fierce beasts in human form. The 4 of them were in charge of King Yang Qiu's personal guards, and they were only responsible for his personal safety. According to Wu Qi, all their brain cells had been replaced by muscle fibers and plasma. Bringing the 4 ferocious beasts in human form, Wu Qi traveled across the true land of the great wilderness. Lightning bolts were twisting and flashing above his head from time to time, and he was surrounded by whistling storms. Carefully, he searched for a relatively safe passage between the mountains. This territory had only been born from the chaos for about 3 years, and the laws of heaven and earth had not yet stabilized. Thus, all kinds of natural disasters had emerged one after another, and a slight carelessness could cost them their lives. The group of people hurried between the mountains, occasionally leaping into the air and flying for a short distance. They traveled in this manner for more than 6 hours, passing through dozens of terrible natural disasters that suddenly erupted, avoiding the bombardment of dense hailstones and snowstorms that could freeze gold immortals to death, and luckily escaping the sudden eruption of an underground fire vein. Finally, the group of people arrived outside the valley at the core of the mountains. A dark cloud slowly rolled over from above his head, and hair-thin raindrops slowly drifted down from the sky. The raindrops were sparkling like crystals, and the semi-solid raindrops let out a silvery tinkling noise when they hit the ground, raising a large amount of cold mist that had a radius of a zhang. The strength of these raindrops was comparable to the arrows shot from the heavy crossbows specially made by Diyu, and the coldness contained in them was strong enough to freeze the souls of ordinary heaven immortals. Both the human emperor of Deyu and the great celestial emperor of the celestial court had decreed that no one was allowed to enter this land that had just been born from the chaos, unless they were upper-tier gold immortals or above, and had great confidence in their cultivation base and luck. Only after the land had cooled and solidified for tens of thousands of years, and when all the laws of the heavenly Tao had completely stabilized, would those with weaker cultivation bases be allowed to explore it. This was an absolutely dangerous place. But both Deyu and the celestial court had very strong experts who came and went in this dangerous place, searching for the innate spirit creatures that were born from the chaos. If they found spirit herbs or rare innate ores, it would certainly be a huge fortune. But if they were unlucky enough to run into the innate savage beasts that had just been born from the chaos and possessed strange and powerful abilities, they would have to pray for their own luck. In the past, a supreme oracle of Deyu had fallen in this place, and a primordial immortal expert of the celestial court had his immortal body destroyed and was forced to be reincarnated. This was a land of opportunity, but it was also a dangerous place. Some people could get rich overnight here, but others could be reduced to a pile of flesh and bones. Had it not been for Yang Qiufenghua and his companions who had carefully protected Wu Qi all the way here, he would not have been able to come here safely unless he used an innate escape art. For example, if Wu Qi had used his fleshly body to block the hailstones that were raining down on him, he would have been smashed to a pulp. Panting, he climbed up a mountain that was about 100 miles high, and in front of him was a valley that was about 100 miles in circumference. The valley was shaped like the bottom of a bowl, about 100 miles in circumference, and about 10 miles deep at its deepest point. It was as smooth as a mirror, except for a natural yin and yang acupoint at its center. Like a Taiji diagram, there was a pool of freezing cold water in the center of the valley, and a volcanic crater with towering heat waves. The water eye and the fire eye formed a circle, from which cold and hot air soared up into the sky, intertwining into countless frost flakes and falling slowly down. What surprised Wu Qi was that the mountain peaks surrounding the valley had formed into a natural defensive formation, hiding the wind and gathering the energies. The turbulent energies in the surroundings could not affect the water and fire holes in the valley, and the water and fire energies could not leak out of the valley, so they could only rush straight up into the sky. But the water and fire energy had reached a balance, so when they rose about a mile into the sky, they would naturally turn into frost and water vapor and fall back to the ground. That way, they would not attract any terrible natural disasters from the outside world. What a great place! So the two dragon pythons of fire and ice are hiding here? Wu Qi was struck dumb as he looked at the scene in the valley. He could not help but be amazed by the two dragon pythons mentioned in Liu Bang's intelligence report. They really knew how to find a good place. The water and fire acupoints were of great help to the dragon pythons, and they were much better than the place where Goldhorn and Silverhorn used to hide. What amazed Wu Qi even more was that because of the two eyes acupoints, the valley was as warm as spring, and the natural energy was extremely abundant. In this untainted world of 10 billion miles in circumference, this small valley was actually rich in water and grass, and all kinds of natural resources. Surrounding the two eyes acupoints was a field of fine grass, about 3 feet tall and as fine as hair. There was no wind in the valley, but the grass was swaying even though there was no wind, as if an enchanting woman was dancing in the wind. In the midst of the fine grass, there were dense shrubs. These bushes all looked the same. They all had a main pole with 9 branches, and each branch bore a fruit the size of a fist. The bushes near the water's eye were a bluish-green color, and the fruits were a dark purple-blue color. The bushes near the flame were crimson in color, while the fruits were bright red like magma. Through the thin skin of the fruits, one could even see the crimson juice bubbling inside. Great Yang-in dragon saliva fruit. Aobuzen sighed faintly into Wu Qi's ear and said, "These two beasts are very lucky. They are also spirit plants of heaven and earth, and are very beneficial to all flood dragons and dragon pythons. A ripe fruit can increase one's magical power by 10,000 years. No wonder they are hiding here. A fruit could increase one's magical power by 10,000 years? Wu Qi scanned the valley with his divine will. There were a total of 108 great Yang-in dragon saliva fruits, or 54 pairs. If all the fruits were ripe, wouldn't it increase the magical power of the 2 dragon pythons hiding here by about 30 periods? 30 periods? Wu Qi could not help but breathe out a long sigh. How envious! What surprised Wu Qi even more was that these 108 fruit trees actually formed a strange formation, which consisted of 12 primordial stars and 9 palaces embedded within each other. Inside the formation, the energies of water and fire intertwined like dragons and snakes. At first glance, the water and fire acupoints seemed to be right in front of one's eyes, but at the same time, they seemed to be far away. It turned out to be a natural formation mixed with the killing energies of ice and fire. With a formation to hide in, a water and fire acupoints to improve their cultivation base, and a spirit plant of heaven and earth to increase their magical power, these 2 dragon pythons were indeed very lucky. When he thought of the Gold Horn and Silver Horn brothers who lived in an immortal's mansion and could only gnaw on grass, how lucky were these 2 dragon pythons hiding here? This newly born primitive land was so vast, yet this small valley was only about 100 miles in circumference. Wu Qi wondered how the people of Myriad Immortal Alliance could find these 2 dragon pythons. Was this the sovereign's luck, or his misfortune? Grinning coldly, Wu Qi recalled the information provided by Lu Bang about the 2 dragon pythons. Their ferocious flames had devoured most of the dozen or so immortals of Myriad Immortal Alliance who found them. After that, they hunted them for tens of thousands of miles, and only 1 gold immortal managed to escape with a wisp of his soul. When he returned to the Alliance's headquarters and reported the existence of the 2 dragon pythons, his soul was disintegrated and he died. That was what happened 7 days ago. Meanwhile, the sovereign of Myriad Immortal Alliance was recuperating with the help of a few elders of Divine Hall, and he would not be able to come out until 3 months later. Currently, the immortals of Myriad Immortal Alliance had withered, and the few remaining immortals were pinned to various places in Diyu by the military of Diyu, making it difficult for them to mobilize powerful immortals to come here to hunt down the dragon pythons. Therefore, the sovereign had no choice but to come here with his personal guards. This was the best time to kill him. According to the information provided by Lu Bang, in order to save his life and stabilize his injury, the sovereign had used his authority to take out 360,000 supreme-grade gold immortal pills from the Celestial Court's immortal vault. Then, with the help of a few elders of Divine Hall, he had used the pills to lay out a strange formation and forcibly stabilized his immortal body and immortal soul. With such a huge consumption, the sovereign's injury would not worsen as long as he did not attack with all his strength. 360,000 supreme-grade gold immortal pills. Even Wu Qi was shocked when he heard the number. The sovereign was indeed a big shot who was in charge of 50% of the pill stores in the Celestial Court. How could he abuse his power for personal gain? Those were gold immortal pills, not heaven immortal pills. Just as he was marveling at the number of pills, a cold spring about 1,000 feet high suddenly sprayed out of the water eye, from which a silver dragon python, crystal clear and translucent, slowly flew out. Then, a scorching flame shot out of the eye as well, and a golden dragon python, also nearly transparent, flew out of it. The 2 dragon pythons chased and played in the air for a while, then twisted their bodies and transformed into 2 beautiful little girls, who hopped onto the grass. Laughing and joking, they chased and played on the grass, and occasionally punched and kicked each other, producing deafening booms that sounded like rumbling thunder. Tisk, 2 female pythons? Wu Qi's eyes darted back and forth for a while. With a serious face, he turned to the 4 young Qiufengbo brothers and said, "What lovely little girls they are. How can we let them take them away to concoct medicine? Well, after we kill the sovereign, I'll plead with His Highness to adopt these 2 little girls. What do you think, brothers?" Yang Qiu Dianjiao smacked his lips as he looked at the 2 little girls playing in the distance, then shook his head and said, "They look very thin." Yang Qiu Leilong nodded and said, "They don't have any meat." Yang Qiu Yushir shook his head and said, "That means they don't have anything to eat." Yang Qiu Fenghua patted Wu Qi's shoulder generously and said, Tan Lang, these two girls are yours. Well, they are neither delicious nor useful, so there's no point in using them. Cold sweat broke out of Wu Qi's back as he hurriedly thanked the four fellows whose brains had turned into muscles. Chapter 697. The four Yangqiu brothers generously handed over the custody of the two little girls transformed from dragon pythons of fire and ice. For the generals of Diyu, they also liked to keep powerful spirit beasts, immortal beasts, and even divine beasts as battle beasts to assist them in battle. In fact, most of them even fused with the souls of powerful immortal beasts and divine beasts. But there was no doubt that these brawny men, whose bodies, including their skulls, liked to keep war beasts that were tall, strong, and awe-inspiring. Cheelants, rocks, and dragons were their favorites. Even phoenixes, which were divine beasts, had very little market among the generals of Diyu. The favorite beast souls of the human emperor of Diyu were those of the Azure Dragon bloodline, and very few of them, including the women of the human emperor's bloodline, chose to fuse with the souls of phoenixes. Therefore, the four Yangqiu brothers were not interested in these two little dragon pythons, who looked delicate and beautiful, but were too small and thin to be their companions. Moreover, they were still two little girls after they took human forms, so they would not have much meat even if they were caught and roasted. Therefore, they generously handed over the ownership of the two dragon pythons. The five of them lay prone behind a boulder and looked at the two little girls who were hopping around in the valley. Wu Qi was calculating their ages with his fingers. Dragon pythons of fire and ice were an ancient species, a ferocious race left behind when the primitive universe was first established. Generally speaking, if they wanted to transform, they would need to possess the cultivation base of a gold immortal, or at least a cultivation base close to that level. Take Goldhorn and Silverhorn for example, they could only crawl on the ground with their big bellies. But these two little girls had already taken human forms, and they were shrouded in surging natural energy, without the slightest evil aura. When they took human forms, they looked like two little fairies with profound cultivation bases. Even Wu Qi could not see through their true forms without using his chaotic divine eyes. Not only did they possess the cultivation base of gold immortals, but they had probably been in the realm of gold immortals for a long time. Only when Goldhorn and Silverhorn mate with them will they give birth to purest flying dragon pythons of fire and ice. Wu Qi smiled as he calculated, many sons and daughters, then I'll snatch a large batch of dragon sons and daughters from Ao Buzan's clan and bring them back to breed. Underhand sect, should I make a dragon python hall? Tens of thousands of dragon pythons of fire and ice. Wu Qi could not help but shudder at the thought of tens of thousands of dragon pythons of fire and ice forming a formation and unleashing their innate divine ability, the divine light of ice and fire. It was a really arrogant plan, but Wu Qi felt that why couldn't it succeed? These two little girls must be captured in their hands. It would be a perfect match for Goldhorn and Silverhorn. Even if it's not a good reputation to kidnap women. Pei, are you even women? Clenching his fists tightly, Wu Qi made up his mind. Before the sovereign came here with his men to capture the two girls, they must not be alarmed. Wu Qi beckoned to the Yangqiu brothers, and the few of them stealthily moved back to the valley where the formation was laid. Just as the few of them had retreated less than a mile away, a shrill whistling sound suddenly came from the sky. Hundreds of streaks of light, led by an exquisite three-colored pagoda, broke through the newly formed thunderclouds high up in the sky and fell straight down into the valley. Wu Qi raised his head and looked up in surprise. It was an exquisite pagoda shrouded in red, white, and blue colors. It was a 7-story pagoda, with countless patterns of lotus flowers engraved on its surface. In each lotus flower, there was a shadowy figure of a Taoist sitting cross-legged, with a bright halo hovering behind the Taoist's head. The power of the entire pagoda was extremely astonishing. Red, white, and blue lights rained down from the top of the pagoda like a torrential storm. Wherever they passed, be it the thunderclouds, hailstones, or snowflakes, they were all smashed to pieces by the tricolored lights. Following closely behind the tens of feet tall pagoda were hundreds of immortals dressed like Taoists. Wu Qi also recognized the face of the leader, Li Qinghua, the son of the myriad immortal alliance's sovereign, whom Princess Zhang Li had once shown to him. Riding on two gleaming flying swords, Li Qinghua, who only possessed the cultivation base of a heaven immortal, landed arrogantly in the valley with hundreds of immortals behind him. In the valley, the group of immortals formed a 9 palaces formation that combined offense and defense. The 7-storied pagoda with amazing defensive power hovered over them, emanating a tricolored halo that enveloped them. Li Qinghua controlled the 2 flying swords, which were less than a foot long but shone with a dazzling light that was hundreds of feet long, and had them wheeling rapidly around him. He pointed his finger at the 2 little girls, who were standing next to the acupoints of water and fire, and snapped, "You 2 little bitches, cut your stomachs and offer me your internal organs, and I'll let you reincarnate with a wisp of your soul." Seeing so many flying swords coming at them, the 4 Yangqiu brothers and Wu Qi had already crawled back behind the boulder where they were hiding. Carefully, Wu Qi produced a few wisps of dark smoke and wrapped them around him, concealing their auras with a mystic incantation from the Directorate of Celestials. The mystic incantation from the Directorate of Celestials was not as good as the one in the scroll of stealing that Wu Qi was cultivating, but it was more than enough to hide these immortals. Especially since the natural energy here was extremely chaotic, even if Wu Qi did not take this precaution, very few people could sense their presence from dozens of miles away. Wu Qi could not help but narrow his eyes at the sight of such an arrogant and domineering Li Qinghua. It was this guy who had driven Princess Zhang Lu and her companions, who had just come to Panga continent, into a desperate situation. If Qianzhang Dragon King had not lent them shelter, Princess Zhang Lu and her companions would have been killed by the people of Myriad Immortal Alliance. "TSK, who is this guy?" Although he knew Li Qinghua's background, Wu Qi still asked in a low voice. Upon hearing Wu Qi's question, Yangqiu Dianjiao narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, "Judging by his appearance, he should be Li Qinghua, the son of the sovereign. We didn't know that the sovereign had such a son, but a few years ago, at an immortal pass leading to and from Panga continent, this guy had told us his name, so he has been registered in the secret archives of Deyu's military court." Yang Qiu Yushir added grimly, "In the secret archives of the military court, this guy is on the list of people who must be killed. The military court has offered a bounty on his head, and anyone who can kill him will be conferred the title of Marquis and given the land of a province." Conferred the title of Marquis? Wu Qi's eyes lit up instantly. He gently rubbed his fingers and said with a chuckle, "Well, let's see if we brothers are lucky enough to do that." The 4 Yangqiu brothers nodded slowly, their eyes shining brightly. Wu Qi's use of US brothers had pleased them very much. The 2 little girls stared coldly at Li Qinghua, their mouths uttering the unique cackling of dragon pythons from time to time. Their cackling was filled with a ruthless, bloody, and murderous air, which did not match their beautiful and pitiful faces at all. Everyone present could not help but have goosebumps when they heard their cackling. Li Qinghua took a few steps back reflexively. Only then did he realize that the 2 little girls in front of him were the real descendants of savage beasts from the primitive era, not the kind of weaklings he had imagined. Carefully licking his lips, Li Qinghua said in a deep voice, "They are just 2 worms. Somebody, kill them for me and take their internal organs to make medicine." He snorted coldly and said mockingly, "Those good-for-nothings said that these 2 little worms have amazing cultivation bases, and ordinary gold immortals are no match for them. They want father to capture them himself. Why would I need to do that? I can capture them easily." Just as Li Qinghua was talking to himself triumphantly, 3 gold immortals from the Myriad Immortal Alliance, together with 81 heaven immortals, formed a 9 palaces sword formation, unleashing a great sheet of sword light that shot toward the 2 dragon pythons of fire and ice. Obviously, the 3 gold immortals were triplets, for they looked exactly the same. Moreover, they had a set of powerful defensive magical artifacts, which were 3 rings that radiated a cold, green aura. Hovering over the immortals' heads, the rings emitted a great sheet of cold light to protect everyone. Wherever they passed, the ground was covered with a thick layer of xianbing. Wu Qi quickly scanned the rings with his divine sense, and what he sensed made Wu Qi shudder. An upper-grade gold immortal artifact. It was definitely an upper-grade gold immortal artifact. Judging from the ancient runes on them, they were very different from the runes used by immortals nowadays. Clearly, these 3 green rings were gold immortal artifacts left behind from the ancient times. Good stuff. Yang Qiufenghua also recognized them at a glance. He lowered his voice and murmured, "If we can seize these rings and send them to Liangzhu for auction, those young masters from the major clans in the city would be willing to pay a sky-high price for these ancient gold immortal artifacts." Wu Qi gave Yang Qiufenghua a surprised look and asked, "What do they want gold immortal artifacts for?" With a straight face, Yang Qiuyusher said, "They want to give them to women and fool the young masters of the major clans in Liangzhu that they are the spoils of war they have killed on the battlefield. If they are lucky, they might be able to make 3 young masters lose their virginity in one night." Wu Qi rolled his eyes. After listening to the Yangqiu brothers, he had a feeling that the major clans in Liangzhu had begun to degenerate as well. 3 gold immortals and 81 heaven immortals formed a sword formation and rushed out. Once the formation was formed, the power of each immortal's casual sword strike was increased by more than 100 times. Boosted by the sword formation, the 81 heaven immortals were able to unleash a lethality equal to that of an 18th-tier gold immortal. Sword beams shot out like rainbows and instantly enveloped the acupoints of water and fire in the middle of the valley. Suddenly, the roars of dragon pythons towered into the sky. With his keen eyes, Wu Qi saw that the 2 girls had transformed into their true forms. The 3,000 feet long, slender, and beautiful dragon pythons flew up into the sky, opened their mouths, and shot out 2 beams of golden and silver light. The energies of ice and fire intertwined and collided with each other, producing a deafening rumble. "Good heavens!" Li Qinghua screamed. The gold and silver streams of light tore apart the 3 green rings as if they were pieces of paper. The entire sky was filled with green fragments dancing in the air, like a heavy rain of fireflies falling from the sky. The 3 gold immortals howled miserably as blood sprayed out of their 7 orifices and they retreated hastily. But the beams of golden and silver light did not allow them to escape. The beams of light whistled out and engulfed the 3 gold immortals, while the 81 heaven immortals were thrown into disarray. The formation shattered with a deafening rumble, and they were swept into the beams of ice and fire. Amidst Li Qinghua's cry of alarm, the 84 strongest immortals he had brought with him were completely wiped out. Chapter 698. The bodies of 84 immortals were scorched and covered with a thick layer of ice, but they were still struggling, roaring, and convulsing. A strong gravitational force pulled them to the side of the 2 dragon pythons. Staring at them with their cold, merciless eyes that were as beautiful as gems, the 2 dragon pythons swallowed the immortals one by one gracefully. Ruthless, cold, bloody, and ferocious, it was not an exaggeration to describe the 2 dragon pythons. This was the nature of dragon pythons of fire and ice. But they were full of friendship. After swallowing the bodies of the heaven immortals, they each swallowed a gold immortal. Then, when it came to the last gold immortal, the 2 dragon pythons would give way to each other. Neither of them would eat the extra gold immortal. An accomplished gold immortal was of great benefit to a primordial fierce beast like the dragon pythons of fire and ice. Basically, they could absorb all the energy in the gold immortal's body, including the blood essence, the magic power, and the soul power contained in the immortal soul. They could completely absorb and digest all of it. The more they ate, the stronger their cultivation base would be. The 2 dragon pythons gave way to the last gold immortal, who was so frightened that he was about to go crazy. He howled at the top of his lungs and kept begging Li Qinghua to save him or kill him. His 2 brothers had already been swallowed by the 2 dragon pythons in the most elegant way possible. He could even hear the miserable howls of his brothers before their deaths coming from the bellies of the 2 dragon pythons. That mournful and terrifying scene was 100 times crueler than hell. Li Qinghua, who had been arrogant just a moment ago, was now breaking out in a cold sweat. Trembling, he looked at the two dragon pythons. His courage to find a life-saving spirit medicine for his father and ask his father for a reward suddenly turned into cold sweat and slipped out of him. Trembling with fear, he turned and ran away, roaring, "Protect me and get out of here as soon as possible. When my father comes personally, I'll let them know how powerful I am." With the tricolored pagoda hovering over his head, Li Qinghua turned his head and pointed at the two dragon pythons as he fled on his flying sword and bellowed, "Anyway, I only want your internal organs to concoct the medicine. My father doesn't care whether you are virgins or not. When I capture you alive, I'll definitely let you know what is the real power of a man." An obscene smile spread across Li Qinghua's face as he was suddenly filled with courage again. "Young master, I'll let you have a taste of my power. What kind of beauties have I not played with before? This is the first time a dragon python of fire and ice has seen one." At this critical moment, when he was fleeing in panic from the dragon python's attack, Li Qinghua suddenly had some bad thoughts. Wu Qi and the others had good eyesight, so they could clearly see a small tent under Li Qinghua's robe. Although the height and base diameter of the tent were slightly smaller, it was indeed a small tent. What's so great about a little earthworm? Lao Tzu hasn't told us how great Lao Tzu is. The four Yangqiu brothers scolded him in a low voice at the same time. Wu Qi just shook his head and said nothing. He could not believe that the son of the sovereign was such a despicable person. It was the father's fault for not teaching his son well. Clearly, the sovereign was not a good person either. Li Qinghua fled in a hurry. He took the pagoda with him, but he neglected to protect the immortals around him. 84 immortals had been killed, and there were at least 300 immortals around Li Qinghua. However, he only cared about his own safety. The tricolored light emitted by the pagoda, an immortal item with amazing defensive power, had completely enveloped him, exposing all the other immortals to the chaotic natural energy of the primitive desolation. Apart from the triplets of gold immortals, the strongest immortals Li Qinghua brought with him were only a few peak-level heaven immortals. In this primitive land that had just been condensed by chaotic energy, the degree of chaos in the natural energy was beyond imagination. The heaven immortals could not withstand it at all, and dozens of the weakest heaven immortals howled miserably and exploded on the spot. The other heaven immortals felt the immortal energy in their bodies thrown into disorder, and they could not control the natural energy around them. Instead, it was the natural energy around them that was constantly weakening them. Two dragon pythons, one gold and one silver, rushed over with ear-piercing cackles. Their mouths were spewing flames, ice, and dazzling beams of gold and silver light, killing nearly 100 heaven immortals on the spot. Their huge, sharp claws scratched wildly, shattering all the immortal swords and defensive immortal artifacts in their path. Wherever their huge bodies passed, the immortals fell to the ground. Some of the immortals attacked the two dragon pythons with all their might, roaring and unleashing their strongest immortal spells. Unfortunately, in this place where the natural energy was chaotic, they had just condensed their spells in their palms, but before they could unleash them, the chaotic natural energy had detonated them prematurely. The more powerful an immortal spell was, the more destructive it would be when it self-detonated. Huge explosions swept out in all directions. Dozens of heaven immortals were not killed by the dragon pythons, but were blown to pieces by their companions. Wu Qi could not help but nod as he looked at the two dragon pythons. Their cultivation base was much stronger than that of Goldhorn and Silverhorn. Currently, Goldhorn and Silverhorn were still breathing red and white flames and ice, but the water and fire energy they were breathing had evolved into gold and silver, which was more than 10,000 times more powerful than what Goldhorn and Silverhorn could breathe out. Goldhorn and Silverhorn were too lazy, spending all their time eating and drinking around Princess Zhonglu. How could they still be dragon pythons of fire and ice? They were simply two pigs. Amidst shrill howls, hundreds of heaven immortals were killed by the two dragon pythons. The ground was littered with broken limbs and golden blood. The valley that was originally pleasing to the eye had become no different from hell. But, The two dragon pythons were not willing to give up. They soared into the sky at the same time, flapped their huge, translucent, and exceptionally light wings, and turned into two streams of light that caught up to Li Qinghua in a flash. They opened their huge mouths and shot out beams of gold and silver light. A deafening rumble rang out as a thick dark cloud was torn apart by the beams of light and smashed straight into Li Qinghua's tricolored pagoda. Li Qinghua shrieked in horror and despair. The pagoda burst into a blinding light as it was knocked dozens of miles away like a bullet and slammed heavily into the side of a towering mountain. As mentioned before, the mountains here were all freshly formed mountain bones, and their hardness was unimaginable. Li Qinghua was thrown so far away that the pagoda over his head smashed into the mountain. The impact only produced a large number of sparks and a deep rumble, but did not leave a mark on the mountain. The impact made Li Qinghua dizzy, and blood kept oozing out of his mouth. But the pagoda he was wearing was really an excellent treasure. The attack from the two dragon pythons, which could kill a gold immortal in an instant, did not hurt him at all. Grimacing in pain, Li Qinghua shoved a few pills into his mouth, then steered the pagoda, which was now much dimmer, up into the sky and quickly fled into the distance. The two dragon pythons followed closely behind Li Qinghua, spitting out strong beams of gold and silver to bombard him all the way, making him scream and nearly pass out. But the two dragon pythons seemed to have some scruples. After chasing for less than 1,000 miles, they quickly returned to their lair, devoured all the heaven immortals, and then immediately retreated into the fire and ice acupoints to cultivate, digesting the rich prey they had accidentally obtained this time. Li Qinghua's immortal energy was depleted, and his internal organs were severely injured. If it were not for the protection of the pagoda he had stolen from his father, he would have been killed by the two dragon pythons. Even so, this Ling Long treasure pagoda was a powerful ancient magical weapon, but he was not its master and could not activate its full power. Therefore, when he was attacked by the dragon python, he was severely injured and had reached the point where he was like a lamp that had run out of oil. He fell heavily to the ground and hurriedly shoved a few pills into his mouth. Then he suddenly burst into a hoarse cry, "Dad, where are you? I'm suffering here. Dad, please come and save me. Stop your seclusion and come out to save me." Wu Qi and the Yangqiu brothers had been following behind Li Qinghua. When they saw him fall to the ground and the pagoda fall beside him, the group of 5 slowly walked out from behind a mountain peak while laughing eerily, then slowly walked toward Li Qinghua. Wu Qi and the Yangqiu brothers were all clad in heavy black armors, all over which were patterns of ghost heads. Enshrouded in all kinds of mysterious restrictive spells, these ghost heads glowed with an evil light and looked frightening. When Li Qinghua saw Wu Qi and the others, he was scared out of his wits. "Mortals, why are you here?" he screamed at the top of his lungs. Why can't we be here?" Wu Qi rushed forward and kicked Li Qinghua in the lower abdomen, shattering the last bit of immortal energy in his body. "Li Qinghua, the beloved son of the sovereign of Myriad Immortal Alliance? If we kill you, one of us will be conferred the title of Marquis." Clapping his hands, Wu Qi turned to the Yangqiu brothers and said with a smile, "Everything he is belongs to me, and this guy belongs to the 4 of you. Which of you is interested in being conferred the title of Marquis?" The 4 Yangqiu brothers exchanged a glance, then grinned at the same time and said, "That's great. It's just that you've suffered a loss, so we'll have to compensate you heavily when we get back." The 4 Yangqiu brothers' eyes were almost bursting with fire. Li Qinghua was a felon listed in the secret files of the Directorate of Celestials in Liangzhu, and anyone who killed him could be conferred the title of Marquis. One of them could be conferred the title of Marquis. The Yangqiu brothers and their clan had served King Yangqiu's branch for generations. Although they held high positions of power, over the years, only 2 or 3 of them had been conferred the title of Marquis, and none of them had anything to do with their branch. If one of them could become a Marquis today, it would truly bring glory to their ancestors. There was no need to say anything more. Once they were conferred the title of Marquis, their father, grandfather, and the seniors above them would be overjoyed. While rubbing their palms together, the 4 brothers had begun to think about how they could compensate Wu Qi. No matter how they looked at it, Li Qinghua's immortal artifacts and immortal pills were useless to Wu Qi. Wu Qi, on the other hand, happily stripped Li Qinghua of everything, including his natal immortal artifact, the 9 Phoenix Soul Snatcher, which he had been nourishing in his spiritual ocean. These were all good treasures, as they were the natal immortal artifacts of the beloved son of the sovereign, so how could they be of poor quality? Then, they sealed Li Qinghua with a vicious restrictive spell and completely sealed his immortal soul. Li Qinghua alive was certainly much more valuable than his head alone. Even though the Yangqiu brothers did not have brains, they still knew who was more valuable. After tying Li Qinghua up tightly, when they were about to return home, Yangqiu Leilong suddenly pulled off Li Qinghua's underwear and spat on his crotch. "What a little worm! How dare you say that? Show her your prowess." Yangqiu Leilong lifted up his skirt armor, took off his pants, and pulled out a dark lump. Then he proudly showed off to Li Qinghua, whose face had turned pale. "Little earthworm, this is what I call a one-eyed dragon. This is what I call awesome. Ha ha ha." The 4 Yangqiu brothers flew forward while laughing wildly, while Wu Qi rolled his eyes and shook his head. Who are these people around King Yangqiu? Chapter 699. In the valley where Wu Qi had ordered him to set up the myriad poisons formation, Yugu was carefully concocting a jar of poisonous soup. It looked like an ordinary black clay jar, about the size of an ordinary earthen jar. 3 pitch-black stones were used to build an ordinary fire pit. Dozens of perfectly straight bones were burning weakly in the fire pit. Wisps of phosphorescence rose from the bones, making the colorful soup in the pot bubble. A pungent smell drifted in the air, making everyone who smelled it feel like throwing up. That smell was truly indescribable. It was like a mixture of rotting corpses, stinky fish, stinky prawns, a latrine pit that had not been cleaned for 3,000 years, and other messy and disgusting things that one could imagine. Then, a large bag of baking powder was carefully fermented for 3 to 5 years, and the mixture was moldy and rotten for dozens of years. At least, when Wu Qi had just returned to the valley, his body swayed as soon as he smelled the smell. His vision darkened, his stomach churned, and he coughed up a mouthful of yellow and green bile. Chaotic energy could melt and devour everything, but in the face of such a terrible smell, Wu Qi instinctively refused to let his chaotic energy digest it. So, Wu Qi and the 4 Yangqiu brothers vomited at the same time. They lay limp on the ground, unable to move. Just the overflowing smell was already so terrifying. Only God knew what would happen to someone if they drank the colorful poisonous soup in the jar. Especially when Wu Qi saw a large number of restrictive spells flickering on the surface of the black clay jar. It seemed that the smell of the soup had been concealed by more than 90%. Even so, just a little bit of the smell that leaked out was enough to make Wu Qi vomit so much that he did not know whether he was dead or alive. It was truly a terrifying poison. After giving the clay jar a horrified look, Wu Qi exercised his energy to stabilize his internal organs, and isolated his sense of smell and touch. He took a deep breath and returned to normal. The ancient great Tao of Heaven God that Princess Zhonglu inherited did not have such a vicious poison technique. Although the scroll of stealing had recorded all kinds of deadly poisons under the heaven, it did not have any specific poison technique. Apart from the recipes of intoxicating dragon incense and other knockout drugs that were useful for stealing, there was no mention of any other poison formulas. Looking at the terrible smell of Yugu's poison soup, Wu Qi suddenly felt that he should learn some of these strange cultivation techniques. If all the disciples of the underhand sect could coat their flying swords with poison, even if their cultivation bases were slightly lower, they would be able to pose a threat to powerful immortals. Wu Qi only wished to improve the overall strength of his disciples as quickly as possible. As for using poisons and other shady things, it was not a problem for him. Standing unsteadily next to Yugu, Wu Qi watched as Yugu carefully fished out a palm-sized, 3-tailed red scorpion from under his sleeve and threw it into the earthen jar. Then he stirred the jar with a jade stick, then pulled out a 6-headed viper from his sleeve and threw it into the jar. After that, he pulled out a translucent, steel-blue toad, a 3-feet-long earthworm as thick as a wrist, a venomous blood-sucking bat that measured 10 feet in circumference, a pale green turtle with 3 heads and 3 tails, and many other strange and poisonous creatures. All of them were stuffed into the jar. It was unknown how much space Yugu had in his sleeve, but he had thrown over 300 strange and poisonous creatures into the jar. The jar was only about half a foot wide, but all the poisonous creatures that were tens of feet in circumference and hundreds of feet in circumference were easily stuffed into it by Yugu. Clearly, the jar was a rare treasure. The colorful poisonous soup grew weirder and weirder. Bubbles slowly rose from the sticky soup, and a strange smell slowly drifted out. Wu Qi felt as if a layer of sticky mist had enveloped him, giving him the illusion that he could not breathe. With Wu Qi's current cultivation base, he could live forever without eating, drinking, or breathing. But the smell emanating from the poisonous soup almost suffocated Wu Qi, which showed how poisonous it was. Shaking his head, Wu Qi looked at the jar of poisonous soup that was going to be used in the myriad poisons formation, then told Yugu in a low voice what he had encountered when he took the Yangqiu brothers to investigate the situation of the dragon pythons of fire and ice. When he heard Wu Qi say that they had captured the sovereign son alive, Yugu could not help but look in surprise at Li Qinghua, who was held in the hands of the Yangqiu brothers. Li Qinghua could smell the poisonous soup leaking out of the jar as well. Unfortunately, as all his cultivation base was imprisoned, he could not resist the attack of the poisonous gas. Although Wu Qi and the Yangqiu brothers had controlled their vomiting, he was still vomiting green bubbles. He had even vomited out all the bile, so who knew what he was vomiting now? Looking at his greenish face, if he were to continue vomiting, he would die of vomiting. Yugu tapped Li Qinghua's forehead with a finger and knocked him out. "Well done," he said approvingly. "This boy is more useful alive than dead. You 4 boys have hit the jackpot this time. Hee, which one of you is going to take the title of Marquis? I also have a great-great-granddaughter, who is very beautiful. I can betroth her to you as your legal wife." Wu Qi smiled. Yugu was a good businessman. By getting a great-great-granddaughter, he could immediately win over a new marquis, who would also have a province under his name. It was worth it to trade a great-great-granddaughter for such a great benefit. The 4 Yangqiu brothers looked at each other, and then 3 of them pointed at Yang Qiufengbua at the same time. Yang Qiufengbua's face was a little unsightly. From time to time, he glanced at the jar in front of Yugu from the corner of his eyes, and so did his 3 brothers, who kept stealing glances at it. Yugu was not a good-looking old fellow, and he knew such a terrible art of poison, so the Yangqiu brothers were really not interested in marrying his great-great-granddaughter. But, since Yugu had taken the initiative to bring it up, given his status in front of King Yangqiu, he could not refuse. Marrying a legal wife who looked like Yugu and spent every day concocting poisons in her bedroom? At the thought of the terrible marriage life in the future, Yang Qiufengbua's face turned green. But he could not refuse. Looking at the 3 fingers in front of his nose, Yang Qiufengbua wanted to cry but had no tears. Wu Qi was laughing in his heart. He was too lazy to pay any attention to this group of people. Then he looked at Yugu, who kept taking out countless strange poisons that made Wu Qi's hair stand on end and adding them into the jar. His hair stood on end, and he hurriedly excused himself with the excuse that he needed to check out the layout of the formation. Fortunately, he had Yugu, an old venomous being, with him. Otherwise, he would not have been able to construct the myriad poisons formation. Although he knew the diagram of the myriad poisons formation, and it did have a terrible power that could scare ghosts and deities away, where could Wu Qi find those terrible poisons? Fortunately, Yugu had been cultivating the art of poison since he was a child, and there were all kinds of ancient monsters in his supreme tower. With that, he was able to gather enough materials to lay out the myriad poisons formation. As soon as he entered the valley, Wu Qi saw to use soldiers carefully laying out formation discs, flags, and weapons of slaughter in various places. They were all obtained from King Yangqiu's warehouse, and each of them was of the finest grade. It was the most extravagant formation Wu Qi had laid out in all these years. Even the most basic formation discs were made of materials that could be used to craft supreme-grade heaven immortal artifacts, which showed how amazing the cost of the formation was. Inside the supreme tower where Yugu had parked in the depths of the valley, expert craftsmen sent here by King Yangqiu were crafting all kinds of formation discs, flags, and weapons of slaughter, all of which were made according to the diagram of the myriad poisons formation given by Wu Qi. Generals and soldiers were coming in and out of the supreme tower, carrying out a large number of formation discs and flags that had just been crafted and sent out in all directions. Wu Qi looked around and found that everything had been laid out according to his plan. These DU soldiers were well-trained elites, and their every move was perfect. Wu Qi was very pleased to see them. As long as he could kill the sovereign, not only would he be able to vent the anger of Princess Zhonglu and Wu Qi, but the credit would also be enough for Wu Qi to reap endless benefits. At the thought of this, Wu Qi could not help but smile. Just as Wu Qi was feeling proud of himself, an arrogant voice suddenly rang out from the top of a nearby mountain peak. "It's wrong for you to lay out the formation like this. Let me teach you how to do it. Move these 3 formation discs 30 feet to the west, so that they can communicate with the formation discs in the distance." Wu Qi was taken aback, and then a burst of anger surged out of his heart. This mountain peak was one of the main support points of the west side of the entire Myriad Poisons formation, and the formation discs and flags on it were all made of rare materials that could be used to craft gold immortal artifacts. By randomly changing the positions of the formation discs and flags, it was very likely that the power of the entire Myriad Poisons formation would be weakened. Furious, Wu Qi soared into the air and landed on the mountain peak. Without looking at the person clearly, he snapped, "Which idiot is talking nonsense here? Who said we should move the formation discs and flags?" More than 100 soldiers were placing the formation discs and flags on the mountain peak, while a few oracles were sketching runes on the ground. Upon seeing the arrival of Wu Qi, the commander in charge of the formation, these soldiers and oracles hastily bowed to him. Only a few young men and women clad in white on the mountain peak, who looked as if they were on an outing, held their heads up proudly and looked disdainfully at Wu Qi. One of the young men pointed a finger at Wu Qi and said with a cold grin, "Tan Lang, you're just a rough man from the wilderness. Even if you've obtained the blueprint of some formation, do you know what an array is? Do you know the essence of an array? Do you know what yin and yang and the 5 elements are, and what yin and yang are? You're such an idiot. Do you think that just laying out a formation according to the blueprint without making any changes can be considered as a complete formation?" Another young man pointed a finger at Wu Qi arrogantly and said with a cold grin, "According to the way you laid out the formation, it would be strange if the people trapped in it could not escape easily. I, your young master, am known as the best in the field of formations under Master Yu's tutelage. For the sake of His Highness's great plan, I've kindly taught these useless subordinates of yours, and at the same time, I'll give you some pointers, so that you can understand what it means to... I'm calling you mother." Wu Qi was too lazy to listen to the shouts of Yu Qingqing's disciples. He pounced on them like a tiger and sent them flying away with a series of punches and kicks, who were eloquent but whose cultivation bases had not even reached the first Panga heaven. "Scram! If you dare to make trouble here again, even Yu Qingqing won't be able to save you." Without hesitation, Wu Qi knocked out the teeth of the 2 men who had spoken just now, scattering them all over the ground. When they saw that Wu Qi was so powerful, the group of men and women hurriedly picked up their injured companions and fled in panic. After running hundreds of feet away, one of the young men turned back, pointed a finger at Wu Qi and bellowed, "Tan Lang, you stubbornly refuse to listen to our harsh advice. If you let go of the enemy that His Highness wants to kill, you'll be sentenced to death." Wu Qi's heart gave a jerk. There seemed to be a hidden meaning in these people's words. Chapter 700. While Wu Qi was in charge of setting up the formation to kill the sovereign, Yu Qingqing's disciple had been fiddling with the formation and changing it. Was this Yu Qingqing's intention? Did he want to ruin Wu Qi's plan and make it impossible for him to set up the formation? Yu Qingqing was not that stupid, was he? If so, why did his disciple do that in the valley? By assigning Wu Qi the task of setting up the formation, King Yongqiu had given Wu Qi the most important task of killing the sovereign to him. Such trust was indeed commendable, but in Yu Qingqing's eyes, did it not mean that he did not trust the people of Yu Academy too much? It was hard to say if Yu Qingqing would do something strange. After all, he had been working for King Yongqiu's father for a long time, while Wu Qi was just a newcomer. Following the Supreme Tower all the way to the valley outside, Wu Qi carefully patrolled the place. In the forging rooms on the ground floor of the Supreme Tower, 800 skilled craftsmen sent here by King Yongqiu were forging all kinds of formation discs and flags with the underground flames spewed out of the underground flame vein. These craftsmen were all experts in forging all kinds of magical items. With just a glance at the various formation discs and flags required for the myriad poisons formation, they were able to forge all the items flawlessly like a digital machine tool. Wu Qi glanced at these craftsmen with his divine sense. They were all working hard, and none of them had any unusual expression on their faces. The soldiers who were moving formation boards, flags, and other tools in and out of the workshop did not seem to be affected at all. They entered the forging room in neat rows, and according to the number of formation boards and flags indicated on the formation map, they carried out these tools that emitted faint spiritual energy fluctuations and handed them to the soldiers who were setting up the formation outside according to the formation map. Wu Qi kept a close eye on the soldiers who were carrying the formation discs and flags. They were all carrying out their tasks dutifully, and he did not see anyone tampering with the formation discs and flags. As for the soldiers who were placing the formation discs and flags, they were even more attentive. After all, the Yu's military law was very strict. If they dared to make any mistakes in the placement of the formation discs and flags, once King Yongqiu found out, not only would they be in trouble, but even their clansmen would be implicated. Apart from Yu Qingqing's white-clad disciples who were wandering around and pointing at the formation from time to time, there was nothing unusual. Yu Qingqing, you'd better not spoil my plan, or Yen Dan will be very happy to talk to you. With a chaotic gleam flashing in his eyes, Wu Qi glanced coldly at the disciples of Yu Academy, who were sent here by Yu Qingqing in the name of helping Wu Qi share the burden. He clenched his fists tightly. Time went by day after day. It was not a matter of a day or two to arrange a formation to deal with a formidable immortal like the sovereign, who held great power in the celestial court and whose cultivation base had reached the realm of primordial immortal. According to Wu Qi's estimation, it would take more than 2 months to set up all the formation discs and flags and fully activate the formation, even if everything went smoothly. If the sovereign arrived before the formation was completed, there would be a lot of fun to watch. Therefore, Wu Qi personally joined the construction of the formation. He knew everything about the 10,000 poison formation by heart. All the vital points were personally arranged by him, and with his guidance, the 10,000 poison formation had taken shape in just half a month. A murderous aura gradually rose up into the sky in the huge valley, but this murderous aura was blocked by some kind of invisible barrier and could only circle around in the valley. But, during the past half a month, a rumor began to spread among the soldiers who deployed the formation that the myriad poisons formation was just a donkey's dung egg that looked good, and in fact, it did not have any power. On several occasions, Wu Qi had overheard the soldiers whispering to each other while they were working. The myriad poisons formation could only trap and kill heaven immortals at most, and it had no power over gold immortals, let alone the sovereign of myriad immortal alliance. Some even said that Wu Qi was just an illiterate hunter who was lucky enough to obtain some formation blueprints, but in fact, he did not even know the most basic way of setting up formations. The power of the myriad poisons formation was great, but because it was Wu Qi who had modified it, it had become worthless. Some even secretly said that Wu Qi was just lucky to break the formation when he was serving in Bo Yunting's army, and that all the credit belonged to Bo Yunting. Had it not been for Bo Yunting's wisdom and the power of a celestial being, there was no way he could have broken the formation. Some even swore that Bo Yunting had been conferred the title of Marquis because of this great contribution. The human emperor was wise, and he had his reasons for conferring titles. The fact that Bo Yunting was conferred the title of Marquis proved that the formation was indeed broken by him. In order to convince the soldiers that the destruction of the formation had nothing to do with Wu Qi, someone vividly described to them how extraordinary Bo Yunting's father, Bo Zhongfu, was. He said that the Bo clan was a close subject of the human emperor, and that every generation of their members were erudite, and that they had a deep understanding of the immortals' formations. That was why they were able to destroy the formation so easily. Since the members of the Bo clan were so skilled in the Tao of formations, it must be Bo Yunting who broke the formation, and it had nothing to do with Wu Qi. So, the soldiers were secretly thinking that if the myriad poisons formation really could not trap the sovereign, then wouldn't King Yangqiu's plan to ambush him fail miserably? It was not a big deal if they failed to kill the sovereign, but if they failed, they would be killed. Who did not know the power of immortals? Their immortal swords and immortal thunders were incredibly lethal. King Yangqiu and Wu Qi were both high-ranking officials in the army, and if they failed, they would certainly be able to escape. But weren't the soldiers in the formation the unlucky ones? Rumors spread one after another, and all kinds of unfavorable statements against Wu Qi spread through the army in just 2 or 3 days. When the soldiers began to discuss these remarks against Wu Qi, their morale was shaken. Their work efficiency plummeted, and their attitude became careless. The formation work, which used to be as precise and reliable as an assembly line, had now become like a hairy wild boar embroidering a flower. Everything had become too horrible to look at. Once again, when Wu Qi discovered that a few absent-minded soldiers had placed the formation discs on one of the pivots of the formation in the wrong position, and a few extremely powerful weapons deployed near the discs were placed in the wrong positions as well, Wu Qi became really angry. No matter who was behind these rumors, at least he was now paid by King Yangqiu, and he was supposed to work for King Yangqiu wholeheartedly instead of hindering him from behind. Even a man like Wu Qi, who never regarded himself as King Yangqiu's subordinate, is wholeheartedly laying out the formation to help King Yangqiu make a great contribution. As King Yangqiu's confidant, how could you do such a thing? Flustered and exasperated, Wu Qi stood on a lofty mountain overlooking the whole valley. After a full 2 hours of careful planning, a few fiend shadows suddenly flashed under his feet. With a sinister smile on his face, Wu Qi murmured in a low voice, "Since you want to play, let's have a good time." Carrying a large number of materials and immortal stones, the fiend shadows swarmed in all directions and began to lay out their formations inside and outside the valley. Yu Gu, the only person in the valley who could see through the movements of these celestial fiend puppets, was nervously brewing a pot of poisonous soup. No one else, whether it was the soldiers led by the Yangqiu brothers or the oracles in the Supreme Tower, could see through the movements of these puppets who were using the innate escape art found in the Scroll of Stealing. Therefore, Wu Qi boldly allowed them to do whatever they wanted in the valley, making fine adjustments to the myriad poisons formation inch by inch. If you want to make trouble, then go ahead. Wu Qi was determined to let these people know what a real expert in formations was. Didn't you, Yu Qingqing, say that Wu Qi knows nothing about the Tao of formations? Let's see how Wu Qi slaps your face when the time comes. Time continued to pass as Wu Qi worked intensely. The rumors about Wu Qi in the valley became more and more unbearable. When the soldiers saw that Wu Qi did not respond to the previous rumors, they spread them faster and faster, and they became bolder and more unscrupulous when discussing them. Wu Qi had once laid out a formation in front of a small mountain. Hundreds of feet behind the mountain, a group of soldiers squatted in a row and dawdled on the ground, discussing the fact that Wu Qi had offered all his 18 wives to King Yangqiu to warm his bed. King Yangqiu was overjoyed, so he specially transferred Wu Qi to his side as his personal guard. This time, it was Wu Qi who offered his mother and grandmother to King Yangqiu's father, King Yangshan. King Yangshan was very satisfied with them, and that was why he put Wu Qi in charge of laying out the formation and ambushing the sovereign. In addition to this kind of direct personal attack, there were also some more absurd rumors, such as that Wu Qi was simply a gigolo, and that King Yangqiu had taken a fancy to his beauty, and that was why he supported him. Some even said that Wu Qi was not very good-looking, and that it was Wu Qi's twin brother who had caught King Yangqiu's attention at first glance. That was why King Yangqiu was so concerned about his brother-in-law. Wu Qi threw his head back and sighed. The thought of killing those who spread the rumors rose in his mind. No matter who it is, when this is over, I'll teach you a lesson. You Qingqing? Or someone else? I don't care who it is. Even if I killed the wrong person, since I've insulted my family, I'll just have to wait to be stabbed. Amidst Wu Qi's cold laughter, the formation of myriad poisons formation was finally completed in a sloppy way. As Yu Gu's jar of poisonous soup was completed, Wu Qi began to smear it on all the magical artifacts in the formation. At the same time, Yu Gu also put the countless poisonous insects, beasts, flowers, and grasses he kept in his supreme tower into the formation, turning the valley into a land of deadly poison. In particular, he put the medicinal soup in the pond in the secret chamber where Wu Qi had kidnapped King Yangqiu that day into the valley. The small pond turned into a torrential wave that swept across the valley, and wherever it passed, poisonous mosses of various colors sprouted from the ground. A few inches of moss covered the entire valley. The moss was wriggling like worms. It was a terrifying sight to behold. Standing on the peak of a lofty mountain, Wu Qi could hear the whispers and comments of the soldiers around him, and he could not help but nod his head in satisfaction when he saw the valley had suddenly turned into a land of deadly poison. Yu Gu's foundation was better than Wu Qi had imagined. Of the 10,000 poisons recorded in the Scroll of Stealing, Yu Gu had collected 1,092 of them. The power of this myriad poisons formation was not weak at all. Where are you, sovereign? After the myriad poisons formation was set up, another supreme tower came through the void and brought King Yangqiu and a group of elite generals and generals he had gathered. After circling the valley, the supreme tower sped away into the distance, seemingly uninterested in King Yangqiu's killing of the sovereign. King Yangqiu had arrived with all his trusted ministers, waiting for the sovereign's arrival. Chapter 701. In the valley where the myriad poisons formation was hidden, Yu Gu had opened up a small hall with his mighty magic power. King Yangqiu and his confidants were having a meeting in the hall. In order to kill the sovereign, King Yangqiu had brought all the experts around him. There were more than 1,000 generals and oracles who were gold immortals, and together with Yu Gu, a supreme oracle whose overall strength was strong enough to fight a primordial immortal, their overall strength was truly terrifying. In addition to these experts, King Yangqiu had also deployed an army of 120,000 soldiers to the myriad poisons formation, each holding a formation flag. The army of 120,000 were elites who had cultivated various cultivation techniques of the human race, and all of them had the cultivation base of the 7 stars realm of the first Panga heaven or above. Any soldier in this army was strong enough to control a small heavenly realm in outer heavenly realms. At the moment, only King Yangqiu and dozens of his trusted generals were discussing something in the hall Yu Gu had built. Wu Qi was holding the diagram of the myriad poisons formation in his hand, explaining its various mysteries to King Yangqiu and the others. The formation was vicious and sinister, a pure killing formation. Once it was activated, it would be filled with deadly poisons. Thousands of poisons were fused into one, turning into invisible poisons that could hurt people without being noticed. In addition to that, there were also countless poisonous insects and beasts hiding in the dark to hurt people. It was a very powerful formation. Everyone in the hall was listening carefully to Wu Qi's explanation of the functions of the formation and what they needed to pay attention to. Yu Qingqing was the only one who was sitting in his 4-wheeled wooden chariot, stroking his beard and smiling disapprovingly. From time to time, he glanced at King Yangqiu out of the corner of his eye, then suddenly clapped his hands and burst into laughter. General Tan Lang seems to be very confident in the power of this formation, isn't he? If something goes wrong with this myriad poisons formation and the sovereign manages to escape, who should bear the responsibility for the great effort that your highness has put in and spent so many materials to construct this formation? King Yangqiu narrowed his eyes and looked at Wu Qi without saying a word. Wu Qi gave Yu Qingqing a look and said with a faint smile, "Your highness, how can there be a foolproof formation in the world?" Yu Qingqing smiled. Just as he was about to boast about his attainments in formations, he suddenly realized that he could not continue the conversation, so he quickly shut his mouth and glared angrily at Wu Qi. If Yu Qingsheng told King Yangqiu that his formation was stronger than Wu Qi's myriad poisons formation, the consequences would be dire. Once the sovereign broke out of the formation, there would certainly be people who would gossip about him. Why didn't you offer the formation map to serve His Highness when you have such a high attainment in formations? With a cold snort, Yu Qingsheng said dryly, in any case, this operation is extremely important. If it succeeds, Your Highness will be rewarded with a great merit. General Tan Lang has to take responsibility for the expenditure of so much manpower and resources. Wu Qi ignored Yu Qingsheng's words. Instead, he cupped his fist and said to King Yangqiu, Your Highness, I've done my best to lay out the myriad poisons formation. King Yangqiu nodded slowly and cried out in a deep voice, Tan Lang has done his best. If the myriad poisons formation can't kill the sovereign, it means he is not fated to die. In short, we've captured the sovereign's son alive, and that's a considerable credit. If we succeed in killing the sovereign, it'll be great, but if we fail, it's not worth anything. We can just treat it as training for our soldiers. Yu Qingsheng frowned slightly. It made him very uncomfortable that King Yangqiu had such an attitude toward Wu Qi. Wu Qi, on the other hand, cupped his fist and bowed to King Yangqiu, then turned to give Yu Qingsheng a cold look. King Yangqiu snorted coldly, leaned back on his throne, and said in a low voice, Let's not talk about anything else, but I heard that someone started a rumor to shake the morale of the army when we were laying out the formation. If the sovereign is killed, I won't bother to look into it. But, if he really manages to break out of the formation and escape, don't blame me for getting to the bottom of this matter. No matter who is behind this, I'll definitely punish him severely. Yu Qingsheng's smile froze slightly, and then his smile became even more relaxed, like a lofty expert. King Yangqiu's fingers moved slightly, and a palm-sized square jade tablet with a ferocious dragon carved on it flew out and fell into Wu Qi's hand. This is a mystic technique of De Yu's secret palace, the Dragon Kill, he said in a low voice. It's a set of mystic arts that specializes in cultivating both fleshly body and magic. It's based on the dragon transformation script of dragons and combined with various mystic arts of De Yu. It's extremely powerful. Tan Lang, give it a try and see if you can cultivate it. After taking the jade tablet, Wu Qi sent his divine sense into it, and immediately, countless mystic arts poured into it. As King Yangqiu said, this was a powerful divine ability based on the dragon transformation script of dragons and combined with various mystic arts of De Yu. With the fleshly body as the foundation and powerful mystic arts of magic, it could unleash an extraordinarily terrible lethality. With the dragon transformation script as the foundation, Wu Qi could not help but chuckle in his heart. He had now cultivated the dragon transformation script to the peak realm of heavenly dragon transformation, and this dragon kill was just right for him. Immediately, Wu Qi held the jade tablet in his hand and quickly transformed the chaotic energy in his body into billowing dragon energy, which flowed rapidly through his extremely wide meridians like a great river. Other cultivators and immortals might make some noise when their immortal energy flowed through their meridians, but it would never produce such a terrible sound as Wu Qi's. A huge sound wave rushed out of Wu Qi's body, and everyone could see waves of dark dragon energy tumbling rapidly under Wu Qi's skin. It was as if the Milky Way was rolling backward, or dozens of seas were overturned with a single palm strike. Yu Qingsheng's face suddenly turned livid. Staring blankly at Wu Qi, he scolded in a low voice, "What a freak!" King Yangqiu's eyes went wide. He rose to his feet with joy, nodded repeatedly, and praised, "Wonderful! The aptitude of a man who cultivates both fleshly body and magic is indeed extraordinary. It's worth it for me to come back to Liangzhu and spend a lot of money to exchange for this dragon kill from the revered elders of the secret palace." A deep dragon roar came out of Wu Qi's mouth, and then it went on, while faint black scales began to emerge from Wu Qi's skin. Standing in the great hall, Wu Qi kept pouring into his body from the surrounding natural energy and Pangu sacred energy, And gradually, gusts of chilly wind and ghost fire began to pour out of the ground and fuse into his body. After more than 2 hours, under the horrified gazes of the crowd, Wu Qi suddenly opened his eyes, from which 2 beams of blood-red light shot out. Ferocious and violent dragon roars kept ringing out of Wu Qi's mouth, and suddenly his skin was covered with 3 thick layers of black dragon scales. The scales exuded a strong murderous aura, while gusts of chilly wind and evil aura spewed out of every one of them. Amidst a series of cracking sounds, Wu Qi's body grew taller and taller. In just 10 minutes, Wu Qi's body had grown to about 30 feet tall. With a wave of his arms, dozens of black dragon shadows rushed out of Wu Qi's body. Shrouded in chilly wind and ghost fire, they pierced through the void and drilled countless bowl-sized holes in the void hundreds of feet around Wu Qi. These dragon shadows let out shrill cries, which contained a demonic sound that could shake one's soul. Terrible sound waves spread out in waves, causing King Yangqiu and the many military officers standing in front of the throne to sway and nearly fall to the ground. Sticky black ghost fire spread out of Wu Qi's body, quickly enveloping him in a layer of ghost fire that was about 20 feet thick. This kind of ghost fire was the 9 nether ghost flame, condensed from the aura of the yellow spring and the boundless aura of death in the dragon kill. It was the filthiest and most vicious flame in the world. Not only did it have an incredible heat, but it was also good at polluting all souls, spirit bodies, and all kinds of magical artifacts. Apart from a few powerful immortal artifacts crafted with pure yang energy, all other immortal artifacts, even top-grade gold immortal artifacts, would immediately turn from dazzling immortal artifacts into pebbles in a latrine if they were touched by this 9 nether ghost flame. Even Yu Gu, who had been sitting calmly off to the side, could not help but rise to his feet in shock. Eyes wide, he stared at Wu Qi and cried out, "The 9 nether ghost flame? This is the first time you've cultivated the dragon kill, and yet you're able to conjure the strongest spell? Tan Lang, are you married? I have tens of thousands of granddaughters, great-granddaughters, and great-granddaughters. You can choose any one of them." Wu Qi laughed disapprovingly, then fixed his blood-red eyes at Yu Qingqing, whose face was livid. "If she is old Mr. Yu Gu's daughter, I'm afraid she can only be my concubine," he said aloud. Tan Lang already has someone he loves. Was it really rare for him to be able to conjure the 9 nether ghost flame when he was cultivating the dragon kill for the first time? The chaotic energy in his body could transform into any energy in the world, so as long as he understood the dragon kill, he could cast any spell he wanted. In just over 2 hours, Wu Qi had completely mastered all the techniques of the dragon kill. He had even made some improvements to the evil dragon kill, making the secret technique several times more powerful and vicious. Even the defensive power of the humanoid dragon body he had condensed was much stronger. King Yangqiu glared at Yu Gu angrily. "This is the first time I've cultivated the dragon kill, but Wu Qi has already made such an achievement. His value is more precious than any jade disc of Lian City. Junior, I wish I could throw all my sisters into Wu Qi's bed to win him over. Why you here? Do you think you clan of Zhong province can recruit such a talent?" King Yangqiu clapped his hands and said cheerfully, "Good, good, very good. The dragon kill is extremely powerful, and if I can master it, I will be able to challenge those who are several realms stronger than me. Tan Lang, work hard, and I'll reward you handsomely." If it were not for the fact that Wu Qi did not have any outstanding achievements at the moment, King Yangqiu would have written a memorial to the human emperor to confer the title of Marquis to Wu Qi. But it did not matter. As long as the sovereign was killed, Wu Qi could share some of the credit with him, and that would be enough. While the group was commenting on Wu Qi's abnormal aptitude, Yangqiu Yushi, who was in charge of the army outside, hurried in with a few generals. Dropping to one knee, Yangqiu Yushi cried out in a loud voice, "Your Excellency, there is some movement outside the valley where the 2 worms are hiding. I'm afraid the sovereign has sent scouts." A cold gleam shot out of the eyes of the people in the hall at the same time. Without saying a word, King Yangqiu strode out of the hall, followed closely by Wu Qi and the others. Just as they were about to leave the hall, Wu Qi suddenly turned to look at Yu Qingqing. Yu Qingqing was glaring fiercely at Wu Qi, and when he saw Wu Qi turn to look at him, he quickly squeezed out a smile. Wu Qi grinned and gave Yu Qingqing the middle finger. Chapter 702. 17 pitch-black flagpoles were planted on the ground, each standing 120 feet tall and exuding a ghastly black mist. On top of the flagpoles were flags that were tens of feet long and embroidered with countless venomous insects. They remained motionless amidst the black mist, with faint gleams emanating from them. Standing in the middle of the flagpoles, Wu Qi and the others looked up at the faint gleams that formed a hazy curtain of light over their heads. It was the valley where the twin dragon pythons lived. At the moment, several strange-looking black-shelled insects were crawling about outside the valley. These insects looked similar to centipedes, with a natural eyeball pattern on their half-millimeter-long bodies. When they crawled, they leaped as if they were flying, and even the speed of ordinary heaven immortals could not catch up with them. These were the strange insects that the oracles of Dayu's Directorate of Celestials, who specialized in the art of poison, liked to keep. They were so gifted that their aura could fuse with the environment around them at any time. Unless one had cultivated a special divine ability to see them with the naked eye, only a top-notch primordial immortal or Buddhist ancestor could find them with divine sense. These insects were scattered around the valley, and everything they saw could be fed back to them through the specially refined eye bug flag. It was the most amazing surveillance mystic art of the Directorate of Celestials. Generally speaking, unless the person being watched knew for sure that the eye bug was watching him and knew where the eye bug was hiding, even an ordinary primordial immortal might be exposed by these strange insects. In the valley, the twin sisters were yawning lazily in their ice and fire caves, back and forth in their true forms. Their translucent, fleshy wings drooped next to their bodies, fluttering casually as the fire and cold air surged. Occasionally, they would poke their heads out and rub against each other's bodies. The intimate and loving look on their face made Wu Qi smile. Suddenly, a few furtive shadows appeared outside the valley. These black shadows were like the shadows of people under the sun, flying close to the ground. They didn't make the slightest sound, and there wasn't the slightest leakage of spiritual power. These shadows were an extremely rare type of demon known as the shadow beasts who cultivated the immortal Tao. Their strength and status were low, and it was impossible for them to break through the realm of celestial immortals. But just like the eye worms, the shadow beasts were the favorite personal guards of powerful immortals who wielded heavy fists. They had a natural advantage when it came to spying and sending messages. Their escape technique was extremely fast. Although these shadow beasts were only at the level of 36th tier heaven immortals, their flying speed was comparable to that of a peak-grade gold immortal who was flying with the strongest escape technique. They did not have much fighting power, and their most famous divine abilities were their flying speed and their concealment skills. In just a few blinks of an eye, these shadow beasts had circled a few times around the valley where the two sisters were hiding, and even the valley where Wu Qi and his companions were hiding was visited by them. Fortunately, Wu Qi had deployed some small illusory formations outside the valley. These shadow beasts with low cultivation bases were confused by the illusions, and easily let go of the valley where a great danger was hidden. Not long after, the shadow beasts gathered together. They made hand gestures outside the valley and silently communicated for a while. Then two of the shadow beasts quickly flew back the way they came. The other shadow beasts slowly sneaked into the valley, took out a large number of array flags and array discs, and carefully arranged a large array around the edge of the valley. Wu Qi recognized the formation. It was a trapping formation that could reverse the energy of 5 elements and seal off the underground energy veins and the void. It seemed that the sovereign was also afraid that the 2 dragon pythons would use their innate divine ability to escape through the void, so he had ordered his subordinates to deploy the formation here in advance. It also showed that the sovereign's injury was not light. Otherwise, with his cultivation base as a primordial immortal, even if he had just stepped into the realm of primordial immortal, he would not be afraid of these 2 dragon pythons who had yet to grow up. primordial immortals possessed incredible divine abilities. If he were not seriously injured, and if he still had a small part of his divine ability and magic power left, the two sisters would not have been able to escape from him. While Wu Qi was pondering, King Yangqiu laughed coldly and said, "It seems that the sovereign is seriously injured. Although my father was injured by him with a secret artifact, my father had also joined hands with a few sinecures to severely injure him. If a primordial immortal is injured, it will not be as easy to heal as those low-grade immortals." Wu Qi nodded to himself. If a heaven immortal was injured, he would be able to recover by consuming a little bit of his energy, taking some pills, and then spending hundreds of years in seclusion. If a gold immortal was injured, he would need to spend years in seclusion to rebuild his energy, and once his energy was depleted, he would need to spend years in seclusion to restore his immortal body and immortal soul. If a gold immortal was injured, he would need to spend thousands or even tens of thousands of years in seclusion, taking supreme-grade immortal pills to fully restore his immortal body and immortal soul. If a primordial immortal was injured, it would be a big problem. Primordial immortals had fused their understanding of the laws of heaven and earth into their bodies, so every single hair on their body represented the essence of the great Tao they had comprehended. It was a complete and indispensable body. There were very few primordial immortals, and very few people could injure them. As primordial immortals, they would try their best to avoid any conflict with each other, so that their immortal body and immortal soul would not be harmed. Once a primordial immortal's immortal body and immortal soul were injured, the laws of heaven and earth they had comprehended would be incomplete, and it would take a primordial tribulation's worth of time to recomprehend and refuse each law into their bodies. If they were slightly injured, it would take them eons to slowly heal the injury. But if they were seriously injured, and the injury even affected their immortal soul, it would be a serious problem. For example, if the sovereign's immortal soul was injured, ordinary heaven immortals and gold immortals would be able to recover as soon as they went into seclusion. But if a primordial immortal's immortal soul was injured, it could trigger a chain reaction between his immortal body and immortal soul, leading to the complete collapse and annihilation of both. King Yangqiu and his father were able to plot against the sovereign and seriously injure him, forcing the sovereign to offer an astronomical reward for more than 100 kinds of life-saving spirit herbs. But the alliance, as large as it was, could not gather all the spirit herbs it needed. Perhaps King Yangqiu and his father had done something behind the scenes, and it was very likely that all the spirit herbs that could not be collected had been looted by them through the official channels of Diyu. With the map of Panga's mountains and river of the gods as a guide, it was actually very easy to plunder the best quality elixirs that were likely to be only 2 or 3 in a big province before the union of 10,000 immortals did. Just as Wu Qi was sighing with emotion at the means of King Yangqiu and his father, a colorful light began to flicker on the light screen over his head. A ring of purple mist flew over from the sky, rising into the air and spreading out for hundreds of acres in area. Within the purple mist was a chariot that was pulled by a 3-headed crystal horse. The ancient-looking and heavy chariot was emitting a 4-colored light, which was red, blue, white, and yellow. The light shone out for tens of miles, making it extremely eye-catching. The 3 crystal heavenly horses pulling the chariot were tens of feet tall and hundreds of feet long, with a wingspan of more than 400 feet. Their entire bodies were translucent as if they were made of crystal. They were a rare species that only the celestial court kept in small numbers. Rumor had it that they had the bloodline of dragons, and each adult crystal heavenly horse had the overall strength of a high-level gold immortal. In addition to the 2 coachmen in long robes and tall crowns, there was a figure sitting behind the fluttering bead curtain. But the curtain was strung with thumb-sized pearls of supreme grade, glinting with a white gleam that was as sharp as a knife. Even with the special ability of the eye bug, Wu Qi could not see through the curtain and see the face of the figure. On both sides of the chariot were 300 heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals clad in golden armors, mounted on dragon-scaled heavenly horses. Behind the chariot were 1,000 immortals clad in white immortal robes and white jade crowns. Amidst the dense purple mist, hundreds of figures could be vaguely seen, all shrouded in a purple-gold mist. Clearly, they were all gold immortals. Because of the purple mist, Wu Qi could not tell how many gold immortals were hiding in it. But, judging from the way the sovereign traveled, he could tell that there were quite a number of them. What an ostentatious show! King Yongqiu laughed mockingly. The legendary sovereign keeps a low profile and usually brings only 3 to 5 attendants with him when he travels. Why is he bringing more than 1,000 guards today? Could it be that he has been frightened by what happened last time? Yang Qiufengbo and the others laughed in unison. Setting up a trap and severely wounding the sovereign was something that His Highness was very proud of. Today, they were going to kill the sovereign in one fell swoop, taking advantage of the fact that the alliance was severely wounded. If he succeeded, King Yongqiu was bound to be rewarded handsomely, and the status of these confidants around him would rise accordingly. Naturally, all of them would receive endless benefits. Therefore, the more gold immortals the sovereign brought with him, the better. Every gold immortal was a great contribution. In order to kill the sovereign, King Yongqiu had mobilized all the elites under his command and spent so much manpower and resources. How could he let the sovereign escape? The chariot moved at an incredible speed. In just a few breaths of time, it had broken through hundreds of thousands of miles of thick clouds and arrived over the valley with an unstoppable momentum. Suddenly, a purple mist spread out in all directions, enveloping the valley within 100 miles in the blink of an eye. Then, a deep and powerful voice rang out, "Somebody, capture these 2 vile creatures alive and bring them back to make medicine for the sovereign." A war cry rang out, and dozens of golden-armored celestial soldiers and generals rushed out of the chariot. Riding on their dragon-scaled celestial horses, they charged toward the 2 sisters who were playing in the water and fire caves. A gust of wind kicked up, and bolts of lightning emerged out of thin air amidst the purple mist. One after another, the immortals cast their divine abilities and transformed into various celestial phenomena to cheer on the attacking celestial soldiers and generals. Startled, the sisters quickly coiled up their bodies, and the cold and fire energy in the water and fire caves quickly poured into their bodies. Then, they opened their mouths and shot out a blinding golden and silver light. At the same time, the dozen or so celestial soldiers and generals who were charging at the forefront raised the wrist shields on their left wrists and unleashed a thick light shield to protect themselves. A dull rumbling sound rang out as the shields of light shattered. The 2 sisters had easily killed off tens of heavenly soldiers and generals with the cultivation base of high-level heavenly immortals. Wu Qi clapped his hands and praised, "What a beautiful kill! Can it be any more beautiful?" King Yongqiu and the other generals laughed in unison as they watched the tragic scene of the celestial soldiers falling to the ground through the light screen. Chapter 703. Then, a complacent laughter rang out from the chariot. "A beast will always be a beast. No matter how strong your cultivation base is, you are still a beast." Amidst the laughter, the purple mist condensed into a huge hand and reached down as fast as a bolt of lightning. Just then, Wu Qi broke through the dark clouds with the 4 Yongqiu brothers and hundreds of King Yongqiu's valiant generals, charging to the side of the sovereign's entourage of immortals. Wu Qi used the dragon kill mystic art, and his body swelled to 30 feet tall. 3 layers of black dragon scales covered his body, and black 9 nether ghost flames rolled around his body. He was like a human-shaped evil dragon as he charged into the ranks of the accompanying immortals. The purple chi around the carriage churned rapidly, clearly trying to protect the immortals accompanying it. But the unpredictable nature in the sky was too powerful, and the purple chi seemed to be running out of energy. The rain and hail pierced through the purple chi and fell on the immortals. Only the carriage, which was enveloped by the 4-colored light, had an extremely strong defense. For now, nothing could get close to the carriage. 2 thick streams of cold light and fiery aura soared into the sky and enveloped the dragon pythons of fire and ice. The 2 dragon pythons twitched violently and let out a comfortable roar. Boundless cold energy and fire energy rushed into their bodies. helping them quickly expel the discomfort brought by the poison in their bodies. They were spirits condensed from the fire and water energies of heaven and earth. As long as they had enough fire and water energies, what did they have to fear? The sisters opened their mouths and took a deep breath. A strong gust of wind rolled up the dead bodies of the celestial soldiers, generals, and dragon horses, and sucked them into the sisters' mouths. They happily swallowed these trophies, letting out happy squeaks from time to time. Before he finished speaking, a large expanse of misty green hair shot out from behind a tall mountain. Everything in its path was crushed by the seemingly delicate green hair. It was unknown what kind of treasure this green silk was, but it directly covered the heads of Wu Qi and the others. Wu Qi was taken aback. Then he saw the two dragon pythons in the light screen suddenly tremble. Their scales stood up, making their bodies seem 3 times thicker. Blood mixed with saliva kept dripping down from the corners of their mouths. A faint cold air was coming out of the golden dragon python, while wisps of flames were rising from the silver dragon python's body. Laughing evilly, Wu Qi sent out 7 beams of dazzling black light from his 7 apertures, which spun and froze the head of a peak-level heaven immortal in front of him, pinning his immortal soul inside his body. Then he reached out his hand and sent a dark ghost claw whistling down from the sky, splitting the heaven immortal's body into 6 pieces. Laughing strangely, Wu Qi pointed at the chariot shrouded in purple mist and said, "Immortal Ding Jun, the sovereign of the myriad immortal alliance, prepare to die." Wu Qi and the others were delighted to see this. The might of hundreds of celestial soldiers and generals was truly appalling, but it was so easily destroyed by the 2 dragon pythons of fire and ice. The cultivation bases of these 2 dragon pythons were truly frightening. Poor heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals who came with the sovereign. Their cultivation bases were not worth mentioning in front of these 2 ferocious beasts. Poison! Yugu narrowed his eyes and said, "It's poison. And it's a very strange poison. The golden dragon python's element is fire, and when she swallowed those corpses, the poison turned into cold in her body, while the silver dragon python's element is ice, and when she swallowed the corpses, they turned into flames. Hehe, their attributes clash. These 2 worms are going to suffer." Amidst the flattery of the many immortals, a wild blood-red gleam flashed in the eyes of the 2 dragon pythons. Suddenly, the caves of ice and fire in the valley began to tremble. Amidst the terrified cries of the immortals, 2 streams of cold light, about a mile thick, rushed out of the caves, causing the ground to crack and crack one after another, and from the cracks rushed out boundless auras of water and fire. Seeing that they were about to be captured alive by the enemy, the 2 dragon pythons actually detonated the natural energy veins of fire and ice under the valley. King Yang Qiu nodded slowly and said, "That's a good idea. Since the sovereign controls half of the pill workshops of the celestial court, it's not a big deal for him to mix up some poison." At this point, King Yang Qiu suddenly grinned coldly and said, "Hee, the sovereign of the myriad immortal alliance, Immortal Ding Jun, is actually the almighty immortal in charge of 50% of the pill workshops of the celestial court. Luckily, he didn't manage to gather those life-saving spirit herbs." The 2 dragon pythons of fire and ice joined their tails to form a perfectly round defensive formation. The endless cold and heat energy in the caves of water and fire poured into their bodies, and the cold light of flames rolled across them. Yin and Yang coexisted with each other, and water and fire were compatible with each other. With the help of this peculiar landscape, the sisters had actually developed a strange defensive formation. Strong beams of gold and silver light swam around them like countless tiny flood dragons rolling in the ocean. The 4-colored light outside the chariot fluctuated rapidly, grinding away the incoming beams of gold and silver light like a millstone. But the sisters hated the sovereign, who had attacked them in the chariot. So, they frantically extracted the aura of water and fire in the surroundings, without considering whether their bodies could withstand it or not. They kept transforming the aura of water and fire into the divine light of ice and fire, which then sprayed out in the form of strong beams of gold and silver light. A series of cracking noises rang out incessantly as hundreds of heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals were riddled with holes, their bodies spraying pale golden blood as they fell from the sky. The dragon-scaled heavenly horses they were mounted on also let out a miserable trumpet call. They flapped their wings with all their might, trying to fly again, but with hundreds of holes in their bodies, their vitality was rapidly fading away, and before long, they fell heavily to the ground. A large number of flowing runes emerged on the armor of the leading heavenly general, and a strong light enveloped him, turning him into a burning flame. Holding a 26-feet-long snake spear in his hand, he shot out tens of thousands of highly penetrating golden beams that rained down like a torrential rain. Blood splattered in all directions as Wu Qi and his companions caught these heaven immortals by surprise. With hundreds of gold immortals attacking more than 700 heaven immortals, the strongest among them was merely a peak-level heaven immortal. Wu Qi and his companions killed them as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Dark clouds covered the sky, but the thick clouds emitted a beautiful aurora that was 100 times more intense than the sunlight. A large area of halos rolled down from the sky, and threads of halos crossed the void. Of the 1,000 heaven immortals accompanying the chariot, more than 200 were swept into the aurora. Their immortal items and bodies melted silently, and in the blink of an eye, they were all turned into nothingness by the violent natural energy. Strange. Why did he send those people to their deaths? With his hands clasped behind his back, Yu Qingsheng sneered and said, "What kind of person is the sovereign? Why would he do such an unwise thing?" When the heaven immortal soldiers and heavenly generals were less than 1,000 feet away from the sisters, they opened their mouths at the same time. Countless beams of gold and silver light shot out of their mouths, tearing through the void like a reverse meteor shower. Hundreds of heaven immortal soldiers and heavenly generals, who were protected by upper-grade heaven immortal artifacts, howled miserably. The divine light of ice and fire was good at destroying all weapons and magical artifacts, and the sudden change of temperature and cold was more than enough to destroy powerful gold immortal artifacts. Amidst King Yangqiu's cold laughter, Wu Qi and his companions packed up their armors and weapons. Except for Wu Qi, the other generals checked their various spirit talismans, Yin thunders, and other offensive and defensive tools. After a simple but efficient check, they quickly left the valley and carefully made their way toward the valley where the dragon python sisters were. The friction between the ice and fire energy spewing out of the ground and the turbulent energy in the sky produced an aurora that killed 200 immortals like countless sharp blades. Dull thunderclaps rang out in the sky, followed by hailstones, fiery rain, frost, and gusts of wind falling from the sky. These were the unique natural phenomena of the primitive land, so even a drop of rain had a terrible lethality. The immortals accompanying the chariot were thrown into disarray, and countless immortals had to use their defensive immortal artifacts to hold on. As the ice and fire energy collided with each other, the two huge energy veins exploded as if they had gone berserk. A terrible force towered into the sky, sending mountains of ice and oceans of magma and fire flying into the sky, filling the sky with cold light and fire energy. The huge explosion dragged in all the energy veins tens of thousands of miles away. One after another, they exploded, causing a chilling chain reaction in the chaotic natural energy in the sky. Vast amounts of water and fire energy were being compressed crazily inside the two dragon pythons' bodies. Their eyes went wide as they fixed their eyes on the luxurious chariot. The fleshy wings on their backs flapped quickly, sending up monstrous flames and cold light. Suddenly, they let out shrill screams, and two strong beams of golden and silver light shot out of their mouths, smashing straight into the chariot. The two twisting and struggling dragon pythons raised their heads, blood and saliva dripping down from the corners of their mouths. They let out deep screams weakly, but they did not have the strength to do anything to the giant hand condensed from the purple mist. The big formation formed by the small shrubs around them lost control and could not play any defensive role. The big hand formed by the purple gas grabbed down, all the shrubs were broken, and the fruits on them all exploded into jam, splashing everywhere. The endless golden and silver light forced the chariot back step by step, and in the blink of an eye, it was pushed tens of thousands of feet away. When the golden light shot out by the heavenly generals hit the formation around the sisters, a series of explosions rang out, and the golden light was quickly extinguished. The power of water and fire devoured it, and the light around the sisters grew stronger and stronger. Their bodies were curled up, and their eyes were filled with a violent aura as they stared fixedly at the hundreds of heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals who were rushing down from above. Faint drops of cold air and flames were dripping down from the corners of their mouths. Above the valley, the heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals who came with the sovereign's chariot roared at the same time, scolding, "How dare you, evil creatures!" as they unleashed their divine abilities and magical powers and charged toward the sisters. The armors and weapons worn by these heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals were of the best quality, at least heaven immortal items. When they unleashed the full power of their immortal items, a golden light immediately lit up the entire valley. The two dragon pythons slowly flew up into the sky, their slender and beautiful bodies reflecting a colorful glow under the reflection of the purple mist and golden light, making them look extraordinarily beautiful. They twisted their bodies desperately, but the poison in their stomachs had messed up the circulation of their energy and blood, so much so that they could not even unleash the innate divine ability inherited from their bloodline. As their bodies flew up inch by inch, the miserable howls of the two dragon pythons grew sharper and louder, and there was a faint hint of madness in their howls. Inside the chariot, the sovereign did not strike again. The purple mist around the chariot rose and turned into a large cloud shaped like a Ganoderma, spinning rapidly as he passively defended himself. Even though the accompanying immortals were badly battered by the sudden outburst of natural energy, the sovereign did not make a move and did not respond to the sisters. The sisters threw their heads back and let out a long hiss, then shrunk their bodies and tried to hide in the ice and fire acupoints. But the golden light fell like raindrops from the huge purple palm, while a strange suction force held their bodies down. How could they move freely? The many immortals standing around the chariot all exclaimed in unison, praising the sovereign for his incredible magical power and divine ability, and for his unpredictable ability. Chapter 704. The endless threads of green light sprinkled down gently, piercing everything they touched. The dark clouds in the sky, the thunderbolts, the hailstones under the thunderbolts, and the rocks under the hailstones were all pierced through. Just like the dark clouds, thunderbolts, hailstones, and rocks, the armors and bodies of Wu Qi and the others were pierced through. Severe pain came from every part of their bodies, making them howl and fall to the ground, twitching and twitching. "Pagoda, rise!" Wu Qi cried out. A tricolored pagoda rose into the sky from the top of his head, emanating a vast sheet of light that enveloped the surroundings. After fighting with the immortals for countless years, Dayu's Directorate of Celestials had figured out countless wonderful mystic arts, which allowed them to temporarily activate the immortal artifacts of immortals with the natural energy of heaven and earth. Unlike the immortals, who fused their immortal souls with their immortal artifacts, these mystic arts compressed the natural energy with hand incantations and spells, transforming it into something similar to the divine sense of immortals, then activated the various formations in the immortal artifacts and unleashed part of their power. Immortal artifacts had their own spirits, and their cultivation bases were extremely strong. Therefore, these mystic arts had to first suppress or obliterate their spirits before they could activate the immortal artifacts. In this way, the power of the immortal artifacts would be weakened by more than half. However, the oracles did not intend to unleash the full power of the immortal artifacts. They just wanted to activate them, and then, just like what Wu Qi was doing now, Wu Qi unleashed the pagoda he snatched from Li Qinghua, performed an incantation gesture with both hands, and pointed it at the pagoda. An invisible shockwave blasted out, and a miserable howl rang out from inside the pagoda as it exploded. The sky was filled with a strong tricolored light, which spread rapidly and turned into a sea of tricolored clouds that was 100 miles thick and 10,000 miles in circumference. Amidst the tricolored light, The overwhelming green threads that shot down from the sky gradually melted away, no longer emitting the terrible aura that could destroy everything. Yang Qiufenghua, whose body was riddled with countless tiny holes and whose skin was oozing with beads of blood, let out a long cry and thrust his claw forward. Purple mist rose from his fingertips, shattering the space within a radius of tens of meters. He grabbed the two struggling dragon boas, dragged them by their necks and brought them back to his side. Wu Qi quickly glanced at the two dragon pythons. The chaotic spiritual energy in his body surged and wrapped around the dragon python bloodline he obtained from Goldhorn and Silverhorn. A faint dragon python aura spread out from his body but disappeared in a flash. It was such a faint aura that Yang Qiufenghua and the other generals, whose souls were no stronger than those of ordinary people, did not notice anything unusual. The two dragon pythons, who had been spurting out dazzling beams from time to time, wisely shut their mouths and obediently shrunk their bodies to around a foot long. Then, they flew up from Yang Qiufenghua's hand and landed on Wu Qi's shoulder, wrapping their tails around Wu Qi's neck like two necklaces. With a smile on his face, Wu Qi gave the two dragon pythons a look and nodded. Then he gave a long laugh, turned around, and left with the captains who also had their bodies riddled with holes. Each of these elite generals had a cultivation base above the second Panga heaven, and their overall strength was strong enough to fight against gold immortals. Although they did not know any divine abilities or magic, their strong fleshly bodies allowed them to fly, and their flying speed was not inferior to that of immortals. All of them were shrouded in a faint purple mist, and when they flew, they left behind trails of purple light that stretched for miles. They looked like a group of purple meteors streaking across the void with a mighty momentum. A violent cough came from afar. Behind the hill where the green light had shot out, a middle-aged Taoist in a moon-white Taoist robe with his hair hanging loosely over his shoulders and a 2-inch-wide white ribbon tied around his forehead with a purple jade inlaid in the middle of it. The Taoist was holding a horsetail whisk that glowed with a green light, which was the manifestation of the green light that could destroy almost everything just now. With just a light blow, the strong fleshly bodies of Wu Qi and the others were riddled with holes like sieves. Fortunately, they had the protection of Pangu's sacred qi. Although the penetrating power of the green light threads was extremely terrifying, the explosive power was not enough. Although they had dozens of holes in their bodies, the wounds were too small. After the purple qi circled around their bodies had already recovered. At most, they had lost a little primordial qi, but it was really not a serious injury. The middle-aged Taoist was the sovereign of the Myriad Immortal Alliance, Immortal Ding Jun of the Celestial Court, an important minister in charge of half of the alchemy workshops in the Celestial Court. He had a round face that was as fair as a silver basin, but now it was covered with a faint layer of gray mist, and there were some sweat and dirt that could not be concealed at the corners of his eyes and the tips of his brows. Although his primordial immortal body was unstained by dust, there were sweat and dirt on him, which showed that his immortal body was rapidly withering and aging. For a primordial immortal, this was a sign that both his immortal body and immortal soul were about to disintegrate. After coughing violently, the sovereign looked up at the three-colored light that was dispersing over his head and said in a flat voice, "You've got Huinghua? Are you luring the enemy by deliberately exploding this exquisite pagoda? Are you threatening me? Heh, why should I be afraid of you?" After laughing mysteriously, the sovereign suddenly cried out, "Wu Xing, you despicable man, hand over my son at once. These two dragon pythons are the medicinal ingredients I've ordered, so you'd better leave them here as well." With a loud laugh, a purple mist in the shape of a rui suddenly rose from the top of the sovereign's head, spreading and spreading for 100 miles around him. Suddenly, 3 jade lotus thrones shrouded in purple light slowly rose from the top. Among the 3 jade lotus thrones, one of them was supporting a ball of pale green flame, another was supporting a hazy pill cauldron that was emitting clouds in the shape of dragons and tigers, and the last one was sitting cross-legged on a 3 feet tall naked boy. However, blood continued to seep out of the boy's body, and the dragon-tiger-shaped clouds around the cauldron continued to shatter. The ball of light green flames was also scattered and deformed, and from time to time, wisps of flames would seep out. "You can't leave now." The sovereign beckoned at the chariot that was shrouded in purple mist. The bead curtain on the chariot was rolled to the side, revealing a human figure condensed from the purple mist. After that, the sovereign flew into the chariot and drove it to chase after Wu Qi and the others. The purple mist, which was 100 times stronger than before, enveloped the chariot. Amidst it, hundreds of gold immortals could be vaguely seen, and from time to time, the roars of all kinds of strange beasts could be heard rising into the sky. The chariot chased after Wu Qi and the others like a bolt of lightning. The 3 crystal Pegasi flapped their huge wings, and every time they flapped their wings, a huge hurricane would rise from the ground, bringing the chariot a few miles closer to Wu Qi and the others. In just the space of a few breaths, the chariot had caught up with Wu Qi and the others, and was now less than 1,000 feet away from them. A creepy laugh rang out as the sovereign narrowed his eyes and stretched out a claw. Instantly, the chaotic natural energy in the surroundings calmed down, and all the natural energy within 10,000 miles surged crazily toward his palm. Out of nowhere, a huge hand, several miles in circumference, shrouded in purple mist, quickly stretched out and grabbed toward Wu Qi and the others. As soon as the huge hand took shape, the flying speed of Wu Qi and the others suddenly slowed down by a few times, and their bodies flew uncontrollably toward it. Wu Qi felt that his body had fallen into a sticky, invisible force, and the pressure coming at him from all directions was extremely great. No matter how he mustered the chaotic energy in his body, no matter how he combined the true body of heaven and earth scripture, the dragon transformation script, and the dragon kill, he just could not break free from the pressure. The terrible pressure made his bones creak, and all his internal organs let out a sorrowful moan. Even though his immortal body and immortal soul had been severely wounded, the sovereign was still in existence that Wu Qi could not resist. He did not even use a little bit of his immortal energy. Relying entirely on his vast divine sense and his understanding of the laws of heaven and earth, he was able to manipulate the laws of heaven and earth with just a tiny bit of divine sense, and yet he was able to unleash divine abilities and mystic arts that were even more powerful than those of top-grade gold immortals. This was the so-called, with a single thought, all things come into being. When one reached the realm of primordial immortals, every move one made contained the great Tao of heaven and earth. Thus, the sovereign's grab was like the entire world trying to capture Wu Qi and his companions. Unless they were strong enough to break free from the shackles of heaven and earth, they would not be able to escape from the sovereign's grasp. Yang Qiufenghua and the others were much stronger than Wu Qi. As mighty existences in the second Panga heaven, they were strong enough to fight against gold immortals. But they were also caught by the sovereign's casual grab, their bodies flying uncontrollably toward the huge palm without any power to resist. There were even some generals who were weaker than Wu Qi. Although their fleshly bodies were strong, they did not cultivate divine abilities or magic power. As a result, the wisp of the laws of heaven contained in the huge palm had wounded their fleshly bodies and souls. Blood kept gushing out of their 7 orifices, and it looked like they were about to be crushed to death by the pressure. Wu Qi took a deep breath and cried out, "Brothers, what are you waiting for?" With great difficulty, he flicked his finger and threw out a small triangular black flag the size of a palm, which swayed in the air and expanded into a large flag about 1,000 feet in circumference. With great difficulty, the 4 Yangqiu brothers also threw out 4 smaller flags of the same pattern. As the flags fluttered in the air, shrill ghost howls could be heard coming from them, while 5 dark torrents poured out of them at top speed, accompanied by terrible whistling noises. The myriad Gu rotting flags were a vicious magical artifact crafted by Yugu. Each flag contained a void of its own, in which countless poisonous insects and venomous rotting corpses were devouring and killing each other. Every year, countless fresh venomous insects and rotting corpses would be added to the flags. After being refined by Yugu for tens of thousands of years, the poison contained in the 5 flags, as well as the various poisonous creatures they bred, had reached an unimaginable level. The dark torrents were a mixture of rotting corpses and the venom of all kinds of venomous insects, stinking, filthy, and containing terrible toxicity. The torrents poured down on the sovereign's huge palm, producing a shrill screech that sounded like ice water colliding with a red-hot iron plate. As the purple palm continued to melt and corrode, the sovereign's body swayed. Suddenly, a line of blood trickled down the corner of his mouth, and a wisp of black smoke appeared on his face. Yugu was, after all, a supreme oracle who was strong enough to fight against a primordial immortal, and the vicious magical artifact he crafted was so powerful that the sovereign's aura had merely touched the torrents, but the venom had already broken through the void and rushed into his fleshly body. With a bizarre smile on his face, the huge purple palm above him suddenly dissipated. Coughing up a mouthful of stinking blood, the sovereign cried out, "What a despicable trick! Hee, why don't you give me back my son? Hurry up and hand over those 2 long worms." With this buffer, Wu Qi and the others had already rushed to the valley where the black spirit's seizing energy was hidden. Without hesitation, they plunged into the valley and quickly disappeared in the dense black smoke. A deafening rumble rang out as dozens of flags soared into the sky from the valley. As they rolled, countless wisps of black smoke rose from them. Clearly, a vicious array had been laid out in the valley. Looking at the valley, then at the nearby hills and valleys, as well as the lofty mountains on the side, the sovereign smiled mysteriously again. With a cold snort, he drove the chariot and followed Wu Qi and the others into the valley without hesitation. "What a petty trick! Do you think I'm afraid of you villains?" A thunderclap rang out of the chariot as the sovereign threw out an ordinary-looking palm thunderbolt, which swept across thousands of miles and shattered dozens of banners in the valley, exposing Wu Qi and the others in front of him in an instant. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.